Hey everyone! Tonight we're traveling to medieval Iceland and the frozen landscapes of Norse Scandinavia, where the dead don't always stay buried, and trying to kill them only makes things worse. This is the story of the Draugr, the Viking undead that gets stronger every time you fight it. Before we begin, go ahead and like this video and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? And have you encountered Draugr in games like Skyrim or God of War? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Norse mythology. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture a zombie from modern horror. Slow, rotting, mindless. Shuffling forward with no intelligence, driven by basic hunger. Easy to outrun, easier to kill. Just destroy the brain or separate the head from the body, and you're done. Standard zombie rules that everyone knows. The Draugr looks at that formula the way a Viking looks at a monk's treasure room. Cute setup, completely inadequate defenses. Because the Draugr isn't slow, it's supernaturally strong. It isn't mindless. It retains full intelligence from life, including the ability to speak, curse, and plan revenge. It doesn't shuffle. It grows to the size of an ox and crushes you with its bare hands. And most importantly, it doesn't get weaker when you fight it. Every failed attempt to destroy, it makes it angrier, stronger, more dangerous. Modern zombies are problems you solve with a headshot. The Draugr is a problem that gets worse every time you try to solve it. Very considerate design for an undead creature. Really optimized for victim convenience. The word Draugr comes from Old Norse, meaning ghost or again walker, which is Norse for this person died but didn't get the memo. The plural is Draugr, and they appear throughout Icelandic sagas, Norwegian folklore, and Scandinavian burial customs that suggest people were terrified enough to develop elaborate corpse handling procedures. These aren't spirits. They're corporeal undead. Physical bodies that died, refused to stay dead, and now inhabit their burial mounds while guarding treasure and terrorizing anyone unfortunate enough to disturb them. Think less Halloween ghost and more extremely hostile former neighbor who died angry and got superpowers. The Draugr differs from typical revenants in several important ways. Ghosts are intangible. The Draugr has a solid physical body. Zombies decay. The Draugr remains preserved, bloated, but functional. Vampires need blood. The Draugr is motivated by greed, vengeance, and a general policy of violence against the living. They live in burial mounds called hogr, surrounded by whatever treasure they were buried with. Gold, weapons, jewelry, anything valuable. In life, they hoarded wealth. In death, they guard it obsessively. Try to rob a burial mound, and the Draugr rises to defend its property. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't accept apologies. It just kills you and adds your corpse to its collection. The Norse had many words for the undead. Hogbui meant barrow dweller, specifically referring to ones that stayed in their mounds. Aptrangr meant after walker, the general term for anything that walked after death. But Draugr became the standard term for the worst ones, the violent ones, the ones that retained power and malice. Norse mythology had dragons guarding treasure, also had undead warriors. Apparently decided both was better. Maximum security through redundancy. Let's talk about what makes someone become a Draugr, because not every dead Viking rises as an undead monster. Specific conditions create them. And understanding these helps explain why Norse communities developed such paranoid burial customs. Improper burial was the primary cause. Vikings believed proper funeral rites helped the dead transition to the afterlife. If you skipped steps, cut corners, or just threw the body in the ground without ceremony, you created conditions for Draugr formation. The dead couldn't move on. They got stuck between life and death. And stuck between states while retaining supernatural power tends to create problems. Dishonorable death also contributed. Vikings who died in battle earned a place in Valhalla, Odin's hall for heroic warriors. Die with a sword in your hand, and you're guaranteed an afterlife of feasting and fighting. Very appealing if you're a Viking. But die from disease? Old age? Accident? Those deaths didn't qualify for Valhalla. Your spirit went to hell, the realm of the dishonorably dead. Not punishment exactly, just less prestigious. But some spirits rejected this fate, refused to accept their dishonorable status, stayed in their bodies instead of moving to hell, became Draugr out of spite and denial. Greed in life predicted Draugr formation. People obsessed with wealth, who hoarded treasure and refused to share, often became Draugr to continue guarding their possessions after death. Their attachment to material goods kept them bound to the physical world. Death couldn't separate them from their gold because they literally chose treasure over proper afterlife. Evil deeds during life increased risk. Murderers, oath-breakers, cruel landowners, anyone who caused a significant suffering tended toward Draugr formation. Their malice survived death. Their desire for violence didn't stop just because their heart did. They rose from graves specifically to continue causing harm. Curses could create Draugr. A dying person's final words carried power in Norse belief. Curse someone properly as you die, and that curse sticks. But sometimes the curse backfires. Your own hatred and rage prevent your spirit from leaving. You become Draugr yourself, trapped by your own malice. The most disturbing pathway was infection. Get killed by a Draugr, and you might rise as one yourself the next night. This created outbreaks. One Draugr kills a shepherd. Shepherd becomes Draugr. Shepherd kills a farmer. Farmer becomes Draugr. Suddenly, your village has a Draugr epidemic, and everyone's wondering why they didn't invest in better burial practices earlier. Vikings had complicated afterlife options. Valhalla for heroes. Hell for everyone else. Draugr for those who refuse to pick either. Original, I'll just stay here mentality. Now let's discuss the physical characteristics of Draugr, because their appearance is distinctive and genuinely disturbing in ways that go beyond typical undead aesthetics. The color is wrong. Draugr aren't corpse pale in the normal sense. They're described as either hellblar, death blue, or narfile, corpse pale. The death blue isn't actually blue. It's a dark purplish-black color, like deep bruising or livor mortis, covering the entire body. The color of blood pooling in a corpse after death, except this corpse is walking around. Some Draugr appear corpse pale instead, a stark white that makes them immediately recognizable as dead. Not the pale of living people who avoid sun. The pale of something that stopped having blood circulation, but kept moving anyway. The size is wrong. Draugr bloat. Their bodies swell up, becoming huge and heavy. The sagas describe them as big as an ox, or swollen to the size of a bull. This isn't decay making them bloated. This is supernatural enlargement. They're physically larger and more massive than they were in life. And they can increase their size further at will. Mid-fight, a Draugr might suddenly grow even larger, swelling up to intimidate enemies or gain mechanical advantage. Imagine wrestling someone who can arbitrarily decide to become twice as heavy and muscular as they were a moment ago. Very sporting. Really levels the playing field. The smell is wrong. Draugr reek of decay. Not the subtle mustiness of old things. The overpowering stench of rotting flesh, so intense it announces their presence before they appear. People in the sagas smell the Draugr before seeing it, giving them precious seconds of warning. Though knowing something that smells like death is approaching doesn't actually help much if you can't escape. They don't decay, though. Despite the smell, despite being dead, Draugr don't rot. Their bodies remain preserved in this bloated, discolored state indefinitely. They don't fall apart. Don't become skeletons. Stay trapped in this semi-fresh corpse state forever. Biology looks at this and files a complaint. The complaint is ignored. The strength is wrong. Superhuman doesn't cover it. Draugr possess strength far beyond what their bodies should allow. They can crush bones with their hands, tear doors off hinges, lift enormous weights. The hero Grettir, famous for incredible strength, barely survived fighting the Draugr Glámr, despite Grettir being the strongest man in Iceland. The eyes are the worst part. The sagas never describe Draugr eyes directly, but they emphasize not looking at them. When a Draugr dies, you immediately close its eyes. You cover the head. You make absolutely sure no one sees the eyes before they're dealt with, because the eyes carry a curse. Make eye contact with a Draugr, and it can curse you. Glámr cursed Grettir just by looking at him during their fight. The curse lasted Grettir's entire life, eventually causing his death. What the eyes look like is never specified, which somehow makes it worse. Your imagination fills in possibilities. Maybe they glow. Maybe they're empty. Maybe they're just normal human eyes in a death blue face, which might be the most disturbing option. The familiar made wrong. Norse undead came in death blue, corpse pale, and supersized. Color options, mass options, curse options, full customization package. Let's talk about the powers Draugr possess, because their strength and size changing are just the beginning. Norse folklore gave them an entire toolkit of supernatural abilities that make them versatile threats. Shape-shifting was common. Draugr could transform into animals, particularly bulls, seals, cats, and horses. The specific animals varied by region and story, but the ability remained consistent. A Draugr might appear as a massive gray horse with a broken back, no ears, and no tail. Very specific. Very disturbing when you encounter it. Some Draugr became seals to terrorize fishermen at sea. One saga describes a Draugr appearing as a seal with human eyes, swimming around a ship until it sank. The human eyes detail suggests the transformation wasn't complete, or the Draugr wanted victims to know what they were dealing with before drowning. Cat form had particular applications. A Draugr would transform into a cat, jump on a sleeping person's chest, and grow steadily heavier until the victim suffocated. This is possibly the origin of the word nightmare. Old English mare meant an evil spirit that sits on sleepers' chests. The Draugr popularized the concept centuries before the term existed in English. Weather control appeared in multiple accounts. Draugr could summon storms, fog, darkness. Not clear how this works mechanically. The dead body develops meteorological powers, but the sagas treat it as standard Draugr capability. They'd call storms to trap victims, create fog to hide their movements, or just summon bad weather out of spite. Prophetic vision was another consistent power. Draugr could see the future, predict deaths, and know things they shouldn't. This made them oracular, but in the worst way. They'd tell you exactly how you'd die, then make sure it happened. Very helpful. Really constructive use of precognition. Psychological torment was perhaps their most insidious ability. Draugr could enter dreams, create nightmares, drive people mad through constant fear. They didn't need to kill you directly. They could destroy your sanity first, and kill you when you are too broken to resist. Or just let the madness do the work for them. The curse ability was devastating. A Draugr could curse someone through eye contact, final words, or sometimes just by dying near them. These curses lasted lifetimes, passing from person to person, causing cascading misfortune. Grettir's curse from Glámr made him afraid of the dark, unable to grow stronger, and generally unlucky. The curse haunted him for 20 years, until he died alone on a remote island, exactly as Glámr predicted. They could control animals, make horses go mad, cattle sick, dogs terrified. Any animal near a Draugr's mound became agitated or fled. This served as an early warning system for humans. Your horse refuses to approach a certain area? Probably a Draugr. Trust the horse. Horses have excellent undead detection instincts. The contagion was implied, rather than explicit, but consistent enough to count as a power. People killed by Draugr often became Draugr themselves. The sagas describe this happening overnight. The victim dies, is buried quickly, rises the next evening. No explanation for the mechanism, just observed pattern. Norse undead received superhuman strength, shape-shifting, weather powers, prophetic vision, psychological warfare capabilities, and curse abilities. Balanced character design. No overpowered abilities at all. Now let's discuss famous Draugr from the sagas, because these aren't just generic monsters. They're named individuals with personalities, histories, and specific grudges. The sagas treat them as characters, not obstacles. Glámr is the most famous. A Swedish shepherd hired to watch sheep at a farm called Thorhallstead in Forseludale, literally, Shadow Valley. The name should have been a warning. Valleys called Shadow tend to have problems. Glámr was described as huge, strong, surly, and generally unpleasant even while alive. Not someone you'd want at a party. But he was good with sheep and willing to work, despite the valley's reputation for hauntings. Previous shepherds had died mysteriously. Glámr figured he could handle it. He figured wrong. On Christmas Eve, Glámr went out to check the sheep despite warnings not to. Something killed him. The next morning, they found his body with a broken neck and every bone shattered. Cause of death unclear. Possibly another Draugr. Possibly something else. The saga calls the killer a troll, which might mean Draugr, or might mean something worse. They buried Glámr quickly in unconsecrated ground. This turned out to be a mistake. Glámr rose the next night. But unlike the living Glámr, who was merely unpleasant, Draugr Glámr was actively homicidal. He terrorized the valley, killing livestock, breaking into houses, riding horses to death. His head grew so tall, it touched the rafters of buildings. The size-shifting power manifested dramatically. The hero Grettir Asmundarson eventually arrived to deal with Glámr. Grettir was famous throughout Iceland for strength and monster-fighting ability. He'd defeated other Draugr before. He was confident. The fight with Glámr was brutal. They wrestled through the farmhouse, destroying furniture, walls, whatever got in the way. Grettir tried using standard techniques. Glámr just grew larger and stronger as the fight continued. This is the crucial point. Fighting the Draugr made it worse. Grettir managed to wrestle Glámr outside, where moonlight illuminated the Draugr's face clearly. Grettir, who'd faced multiple supernatural threats, was paralyzed with terror by what he saw. The saga doesn't describe the face, just says Grettir froze. In that moment, Glámr cursed him. Saed Grettir would become afraid of the dark, unable to grow stronger than he currently was, and would lose all his luck. The curse would haunt him until violent death took him. Then Grettir managed to decapitate Glámr, burned the body, and scattered the ashes. But the curse stuck. Grettir, previously fearless, developed intense nyctophobia. The strongest man in Iceland couldn't grow any stronger. His luck abandoned him. He became an outlaw over a misunderstanding, spent 20 years in exile, and eventually died on a remote island, murdered while weakened by illness. Exactly as Glámr predicted. Defeating the Draugr didn't solve Grettir's problem. It created new, worse problems that lasted his entire remaining life. Very typical outcome for Draugr encounters. Kar the Old was another notable Draugr, a chieftain buried with considerable treasure in a mound in Norway. Grettir, before the Glámr incident, broke into Kar's burial mound looking for loot. This was called haugrit, barrow-breaking, basically grave robbery with a fancy Norse term. Kar rose to defend his treasure. They fought inside the mound, surrounded by gold and weapons. Grettir won, but barely. He took some treasure, including a sword called Karsnauder, Kar's gift, though calling it a gift is generous. Grettir took it by force from a dead man's reanimated corpse. More of a hostile acquisition than a present. Horror for Biggie fodder, Twistfoot, was a cruel landowner in life who became an even worse Draugr after death. He terrorized his old homestead, killing cattle, making people sick, driving residents away. His own family couldn't defeat him. Eventually, they dug up his body, burned it, and threw the ashes into the sea. This worked, but required enormous effort and community mobilization. The interesting pattern across all famous Draugr: they're difficult to kill, and killing them often carries serious consequences. Grettir killed Glámr, but got cursed. Defeating Kar required enormous strength and luck. Hrólfr needed multiple attempts and community effort. The sagas repeatedly emphasize that engaging a Draugr is dangerous even if you win. Let's discuss why Draugr get stronger when you fight them, because this is the specific mechanic that makes them uniquely dangerous among undead creatures. Part of it is supernatural rage. Draugr are already angry. They died dishonorably or violently, refuse to move on, and exist in a state of permanent resentment. Fighting them increases that rage. Rage feeds their supernatural strength. More anger equals more power. It's a feedback loop where combat effectiveness scales with emotional intensity. The sagas describe Draugr becoming harder during fights. Not harder as in more difficult, though that too. Harder as in physically denser, tougher, more solid. Their bodies seem to resist damage more as combat continues. Early in a fight, you might land blows that slow them down. Later in the same fight, identical blows do nothing. They've adapted, become more resilient. Your attacks are still coming, but they matter less. The size shifting plays into this. A Draugr might start a fight at normal human size. As combat continues, it grows larger, becomes heavier, gains leverage and mass advantages. You're suddenly fighting something twice as big as what you started fighting. Your techniques stop working because the opponent's geometry has changed. Strength increases similarly. The longer you fight, the stronger they get. What started as evenly matched combat becomes increasingly one-sided. You're getting tired. They're getting stronger. They don't fatigue, don't need to breathe, don't experience pain. Meanwhile, you're accumulating injuries, burning through stamina, and realizing your best attacks aren't working anymore. Psychological factor matters too. Fighting an opponent that gets stronger as the fight continues is demoralizing. You land good hits. They keep coming. You land better hits. They grow larger. You're winning tactically, but losing strategically, because the victory condition keeps receding. This destroys morale faster than physical damage. The curse element adds another layer. Every moment you're in combat with a Draugr, you risk being cursed. Maybe through eye contact, maybe through its words, maybe just through proximity to something that shouldn't exist. The longer the fight, the more opportunities for something to go catastrophically wrong beyond just physical defeat. Failed killing attempts specifically strengthen them. The sagas mention cases where people tried to destroy a Draugr, failed, and the Draugr came back angrier and more powerful than before. It's like they absorbed the attack's energy and used it to fuel their resurrection. Very frustrating if you're the one attacking. From a folkloric perspective, this mechanic serves multiple purposes. It discourages casual violence against the dead. It emphasizes that supernatural problems require supernatural solutions, not just brute force. And it creates narrative tension. Heroes can't just power through Draugr fights. They need strategy, preparation, and often help. The practical message is clear. If you're going to fight a Draugr, you better win decisively the first time. Because if you fail, you've just made it stronger. And if you barely win, you might be cursed anyway. The risk-reward calculation doesn't favor engagement. Modern game designers would call this a difficulty spike. Norse storytellers called it Tuesday. Just normal undead behavior. Nothing unusual about enemies that scale upward during combat. Now let's talk about the prevention methods Norse communities developed. Because living in a culture with Draugr problems, led to elaborate corpse handling protocols that seem bizarre until you understand the threat model. The first and most important step: make sure the person is actually dead. Norse communities had to be absolutely certain before burial. They'd wait, observe, check for signs of life. Burying someone alive creates obvious problems, but so does leaving a potential Draugr candidate unburied too long. Timing mattered. Once death was confirmed, immediate preparations began. First, close the eyes. Don't let anyone see the eyes. The eyes carry power. They can curse. Cover the head if needed. This prevents the dead from seeing who's handling their body, which theoretically prevents them from targeting those people, specifically if they rise as Draugr. Next, bind the toes together. Tie the big toes with strong cord. This prevents walking. A corpse can't walk if its feet can't separate. Will it stop a determined Draugr? Probably not. But it might slow them down. Maybe they untie themselves first, giving people warning. It's harm reduction, not prevention. Drive needles through the soles of the feet. Long needles, iron preferably. Pierce the feet so walking becomes painful. Again, will this stop a supernatural creature? Unclear, but it's another obstacle. Multiple obstacles compound. Place open iron scissors on the chest. The metal forms a cross if positioned correctly, which has protective properties in Christian context. But even pre-Christian, iron was considered effective against supernatural entities. The scissors specifically might be practical, keeping the shroud in place and the body positioned correctly. Hide straw or twigs in the clothing. This seems random, but serves a purpose. The Draugr has to deal with these before rising. Remove them. Untangle them from the shroud. It's annoying busywork for the undead. Every second they spend confused by straw is a second they're not terrorizing the living. The corpse door was the most elaborate prevention method. When someone died, you'd break open a special door or create a temporary opening in the wall. Carry the body out feet first through this opening, while people surrounded it so it couldn't see where it was going. The dead can only return the way they left. But if they left feet first and couldn't see the path, they can't find their way back. Then immediately brick up the door. Permanently seal it. This practice was widespread enough that archaeologists find evidence of corpse doors in medieval Scandinavian buildings. These weren't decorative. They were functional supernatural security measures. Lifting and lowering the coffin 3 times in different directions before leaving the house served similar purpose. Confuse the potential Draugr's sense of direction. Make it harder to navigate back to the living. Turn them around spiritually. The burial itself required care. Dig the grave deep. Use heavy stones if available. Make it difficult to dig out from inside. Some communities drove stakes through the grave to pin the body down. Not through the corpse itself usually, but through the burial wrappings into the earth below. Physical restraint. Burial location mattered. Some communities buried potential Draugr far from settlements. Others buried them at crossroads, believing the intersecting paths would confuse the undead if they rose. A few buried them face down, theory being they'd dig in the wrong direction. The most extreme cases involved preemptive decapitation and burning. If someone was particularly likely to become a Draugr based on their life, death circumstances, or just bad vibes, you'd decapitate them immediately after death and burn the body, then bury the ashes in separate locations. This prevented Draugr formation entirely, but was socially complex because it's hard to tell a family you need to behead and incinerate their loved one for public safety. All of these practices reflect genuine fear. You don't develop elaborate corpse protocols unless you believe the threat is real and serious. The effort and social cost of these rituals only makes sense if Draugr are actual problems requiring actual solutions. Norse burial customs looked like paranoid overreaction, or they looked like reasonable precautions. Depended entirely on whether you believed in Draugr. The people performing the rituals definitely believed. Let's talk about the burial mounds themselves, because understanding where Draugr live helps explain why they're so effective at their job. The mound isn't just a grave. It's a fortress, treasure vault, and supernatural battery, all in one structure. Norse burial mounds, called Draugr, were artificial hills built over important people's graves. Not small piles of dirt, substantial earthworks requiring significant labor. The deceased would be placed in a chamber inside the mound, surrounded by grave goods. Then the entire structure was sealed with earth and stones. These mounds dominated the landscape. You could see them from a distance. They marked territory, proclaimed status, and reminded everyone that important people were buried there. Very visible, very permanent. Perfect for creating long-term haunting problems. The grave goods were extensive for wealthy individuals. Weapons, armor, jewelry, coins, sometimes entire ships. Everything the dead person might need in the afterlife. Or, alternatively, everything they hoarded in life and refused to leave behind even in death. This created a peculiar situation. Burial mounds full of treasure, sitting in the landscape, essentially advertising their contents to anyone bold or desperate enough to rob them. Haugrett, barrow breaking, became a recognized career path. Professional grave robbers who specialized in breaking into mounds and extracting valuables. The Draugr made this career path extremely dangerous. They guarded their treasure with supernatural dedication. Every Haugrett was a gamble. You might find gold. You might find an angry undead warrior. You might find both and only escape with your life while the gold stays behind. The mounds themselves seemed to amplify Draugr power. Inside the mound, on their home ground, surrounded by their treasure, they were strongest. Heroes who fought Draugr outside burial mounds had better success rates than those who fought inside. The mound was the Draugr's domain. Fighting them, there meant fighting on their terms. The darkness inside mounds helped too. Vikings relied on torches or daylight. Inside a sealed mound, you're in complete darkness unless you bring light. And Draugr see fine in the dark. They lived there, knew every stone, every angle. You're stumbling around with a torch while they move freely. Tactical advantage through familiarity. The confined space worked against human fighters. Can't maneuver easily. Can't retreat effectively. You're committed once you enter. Meanwhile, the Draugr can use the walls, the low ceiling, the narrow passages. They know the terrain. You're improvising. Temperature played a role too. Deep inside earth, surrounded by stone, burial mounds stayed cold year-round. The cold preserved bodies, which is why Draugr don't decay normally. It also made fighting there exhausting. Cold air is harder to breathe. Muscles don't work as efficiently. Your performance drops while the Draugr, not needing to breathe or maintain body temperature, operates normally. Some mounds had traps. Not supernatural ones necessarily. Physical traps designed to protect against grave robbers. Weak floors over pits. Stones arranged to collapse. Vikings might install these before sealing the mound. So you're already dealing with physical dangers before the Draugr wakes up. The psychological impact of fighting inside a grave can't be overstated. You're underground, in darkness, surrounded by death, fighting something that shouldn't exist. Your rational mind is screaming that this is wrong, dangerous, impossible. Meanwhile, you need to stay focused enough to fight effectively. Not ideal mental conditions for combat. And if you die inside the mound, your body stays there. Might be found eventually. Might not. But you definitely become associated with the place where you died. Some Haugrett expeditions that went wrong resulted in multiple bodies in the mound. Did those dead also become Draugr? The sagas don't always specify, but it's concerning. The treasure itself might be cursed. Gold taken from a Draugr's mound often brought bad luck to whoever claimed it. Swords taken from burial mounds had reputations. They'd been weapons in life, guarded in death, and now carried history of violence and supernatural association. Using a cursed sword might give you power, might also doom you. Sometimes both. This created difficult cost-benefit analysis for treasure hunters. The gold is real and valuable. The supernatural danger might be real, or might be superstition. If you believe and avoid the mound, you're poor but safe. If you don't believe and raid the mound, you're either rich or dead. If you half believe and raid it anyway, you're probably anxious and paranoid for the rest of your life, even if nothing happens. The geography mattered too. Mounds built on hills or prominent locations gave the Draugr high ground metaphorically and literally. They could see approaching threats, had defensive advantages. The mound became a fortification with an undead garrison of one. Some mounds were built near settlements originally, but became isolated over time as communities moved. This created abandoned mounds in remote areas, perfect for undisturbed Draugr development. No one watching, no one maintaining preventive measures. The Draugr could rise, walk, cause problems, and return to the mound without anyone knowing. Iceland particularly had this issue. Settlement patterns changed over centuries. Mounds that were once near farms became isolated in uninhabited regions. The Draugr in these mounds were left completely alone for decades or centuries. When people finally did encounter them, the Draugr had been practicing their undead skills for a very long time. Modern archaeology treats burial mounds as valuable historical sites. Ancient populations treated them as supernatural danger zones with treasure inside. Both perspectives are valid. The archaeology explains cultural practices and burial customs. The ancient perspective explains why those customs were so elaborate and why people were so careful around the dead. The mounds still exist today across Scandinavia. Thousands of them. Most are empty, excavated by archaeologists or grave robbers centuries ago. Some remain undisturbed, whether because they're protected by law, difficult to access, or because locals know better than to open them depends on which mound and which locals you ask. Burial mounds were combination bank vault, fortress, and haunted house, with interest rates denominated in curses, and withdrawal penalties enforced by supernatural violence. Probably didn't have good Yelp reviews. Now let's discuss what Draugr actually do when they're not fighting heroes or guarding treasure, because their behavior patterns reveal a lot about what drives them and what they want. They haunt their former homes frequently. The sagas describe Draugr returning to places they lived, walking through buildings, sitting in their old chairs, peering to former family members. Not always violently, sometimes just being present, asserting continued existence, reminding everyone they're not actually gone. This is psychologically devastating for surviving family. Your dead relative is walking around your house at night. They don't speak usually, just appear, watch, leave. Are they checking on family? Are they angry? Are they confused about being dead? No one knows. They're undead, not communicative. The more hostile Draugr don't just appear. They cause active problems, breaking objects, killing livestock, making people sick through proximity, literally riding horses to death by sitting on them all night. The horse exhausts itself, trying to move with the Draugr's supernatural weight on its back. Horrible for the horse. Also expensive for the farmer, who now has a dead horse. Some Draugr seem to operate on routine. They appear at specific times, do specific things, follow patterns. One saga describes a Draugr that climbed on the roof every night and kicked his heels against it loudly. Every single night. Same behavior. Very consistent. Also very annoying if you're trying to sleep. This behavior could be interpreted as the dead person repeating actions from life. Maybe they climbed on the roof when alive and enjoyed the view. Death and reanimation gave them supernatural powers, but didn't change their habits. They're still doing what they did before, just as an undead monster now. Others show clear intentionality. They target specific people, kill specific animals, break specific objects. This isn't random violence or routine behavior. This is revenge, settling grudges from life, punishing people who wronged them. The dead remember who their enemies were. Weather control manifests in strange ways. Draugr who died at sea often call storms. Draugr who died in winter bring cold and snow. Their deaths seem to imprint on their supernatural abilities. What killed them becomes what they control. Thematically appropriate. Practically very annoying if you live in their territory. The territory aspect is important. Draugr don't roam freely usually. They stick to specific areas. Their burial mound and surrounding region. Their former home and farmstead. The place where they died. They're geographically constrained by their own history and attachment. This means you can sometimes avoid Draugr through geography. Know where they operate. Go somewhere else. Simple solution. Though if you happen to live in their territory, moving isn't always practical. Iceland in medieval times didn't have abundant housing options. You couldn't just relocate because the neighborhood had an undead problem. Seasonal patterns appear in some accounts. Draugr are more active in winter when nights are longer and darkness lasts nearly all day in northern latitudes. Summer, with its extended daylight, seems to suppress their activity. They're still undead, still dangerous, but less likely to roam when daylight dominates. This created a seasonal cycle of supernatural threat. Winter brought increased Draugr activity, making an already difficult season worse. Summer was relatively safe. Communities planned accordingly. Important travel happened in summer. Defensive measures intensified in winter. The feeding patterns are interesting. Draugr don't need to eat or drink in the normal sense. But some accounts describe them consuming food, eating at feasts, drinking, behaving as if alive. This might be ritual rather than necessity. Acting out life behaviors despite not needing them. Or maybe undead metabolism works differently than assumed. More commonly, they consume life essence. Not blood specifically like vampires. More general vitality. People and animals near an active Draugr become weak, sick, lethargic. The Draugr drains them passively through proximity. Stay near a Draugr long enough, and you waste away even if it never touches you. This passive drain makes them particularly insidious. You don't need to fight them to be harmed. Just being in their territory, near their mound, in their old house, slowly kills you. Move away, and you might recover. Stay too long, and the damage becomes permanent. Some Draugr collect bodies, kill multiple people, and arrange the corpses in their mounds. Why? Unknown. Trophy collection? Loneliness? Preparing to create more Draugr? The sagas describe heroes finding multiple dead bodies in burial mounds, some recent, some ancient, all arranged deliberately. The implication is that the Draugr is building something. A collection, a court, a pile of victims. The specific motivation varies by telling, but the behavior is consistent. They don't just kill and leave. They move bodies, arrange them, keep them. Occasionally, Draugr interact with each other. Multiple Draugr in the same area might cooperate or fight among themselves. When they cooperate, you get Draugr groups. Small undead war bands that terrorize larger areas. When they fight, you get undead territorial disputes. Not clear which is worse for living populations. The relationship between Draugr and other supernatural beings is poorly defined. Do they encounter elves, trolls, or other creatures? Do they coexist? Compete? The sagas don't explain supernatural politics. But Iceland's folklore includes many creature types. They presumably interact somehow. What's clear is that Draugr aren't mindless. They plan. They remember. They hold grudges. They have goals, even if those goals are just guard treasure and kill people who bother me. Intelligence persists after death. And intelligence applied to violence is always more dangerous than simple aggression. Let's discuss the smell in more detail, because this aspect of Draugr deserves special attention. The stench isn't just unpleasant, it's a weapon. The reek of decay precedes them. People smell the Draugr before seeing it, sometimes minutes before. The odor permeates areas, clings to objects, lingers after the Draugr leaves. It's not subtle mustiness. It's overpowering rot, like mass grave or battlefield carrion, concentrated into one source. This smell affects people physically, causes nausea, makes breathing difficult, triggers gagging reflexes. In enclosed spaces like inside a burial mound, the smell can be incapacitating. You're trying to fight while your body rebels against the air you're breathing. Animals react violently. Horses bolt. Dogs flee or attack indiscriminately. Cattle go mad. The smell communicates threat at a biological level that overrides training and instinct toward flight. This makes Draugr encounters chaotic. Your animals aren't going to help. They're going to panic and make things worse. The smell also serves tactical function. It prevents stealth approaches. You can't sneak up on a Draugr because anyone nearby smells it coming. But more importantly, it prevents surprise from the Draugr. They announce their presence unintentionally through odor. This gives potential victims warning time. Except when it doesn't. Inside burial mounds, the smell is everywhere anyway. The enclosed space, the old death, the cold earth. Adding one more source of decay doesn't create obvious signal. The Draugr can move through its own mound without telegraphing, positioned through smell, because everything smells like death already. The stench also marks territory. Areas where Draugr operate regularly develop persistent odor. The smell soaks into buildings, ground, objects. Even when the Draugr isn't present, its smell remains. This creates zones of lingering death stench that repel settlement and mark danger areas. Some humans seem less affected. The sagas describe heroes who can tolerate the smell better than others. Whether this is courage, biology, or just getting used to horrible smells through experience isn't specified. But smell tolerance becomes relevant skill for Draugr fighters. The smell might have supernatural component beyond physical decay. Some accounts suggest the stench carries power, causes fear, weakens resolve. Not just, this smells bad, but this smell is wrong in ways that affect your mind. Whether this is psychology or magic doesn't matter to the victim experiencing it. Interestingly, the Draugr themselves seem unaware or unconcerned about their smell. They don't try to mask it or avoid creating it. This is just what they are now. Dead things that move and reek. The smell is feature, not bug. For communities dealing with Draugr, the smell becomes diagnostic. Unexplained bad smell in an area? Check for undead activity. Livestock getting sick near a particular mound? Probably a Draugr inside. The smell turns the Draugr's most repellent feature into its most identifiable one. Modern horror often underplays smell because it's hard to convey in visual or written media. The Norse sagas emphasize it heavily. The smell matters as much as appearance or behavior. It's environmental storytelling. The air itself announces something dead and wrong is nearby. Death stench as early warning system. Nature's alarm, except the alarm also makes you want to vomit. Very considerate evolutionary design. We'll continue exploring the specific combat techniques that work, and why wrestling an undead monster with your bare hands is somehow the correct strategy. But for now, understand this. The Draugr is a problem that compounds itself. Every failed solution makes it worse. Every fight that doesn't end in complete destruction strengthens it. And even successful destruction might leave you cursed. The Norse understood something modern zombie fiction often misses. The undead aren't just physical threats. They're problems that fight back, that adapt, that get worse the more you engage with them. You can't just shoot them until they stop moving. You have to understand what they are, what they want, and what methods actually work, versus which ones just make you tired and them angrier. Somewhere in Iceland right now, there are burial mounds. Old ones, unopened. Maybe they contain treasure. Maybe they contain someone who died angry and greedy. Maybe both. The local guides will tell you not to disturb them. They'll say it's respect for the dead, cultural heritage, archaeological preservation. They're not wrong about any of that. But they also might be thinking about the old stories. About what happens when you break into a mound without proper preparation. About Draugr that wake up after centuries and remember they have unfinished business with the living. Is it superstition? Or is it just being smart about risk management? The cost of belief if you're wrong is some extra ritual effort. The cost of disbelief if you're wrong is significantly higher. The Draugr waits in its mound, surrounded by gold it can't spend and weapons it can't use, guarding treasure for no one, existing in angry stasis. Until someone decides the gold is worth the risk. And then it wakes up. And then it gets angry. And then it gets stronger. Sleep well, everyone. But maybe don't go breaking into any ancient burial mounds without proper equipment and a good plan. The treasure's been there for 1,000 years. It can wait another night while you prepare appropriately. Or don't prepare. The Draugr appreciates volunteers. Makes their job easier. The question of how to actually kill a Draugr requires understanding that kill is generous terminology. These things are already dead. What you're really doing is convincing their body to stop moving, permanently, which turns out to be significantly harder than just killing something that's alive. The standard approach, if you can call wrestling a supernatural corpse barehanded standard, involves several steps that sound progressively less reasonable as you list them. First, you must physically overpower the Draugr through wrestling. Not sword fighting, not spear work, wrestling. Grab the undead, grapple with it, and force it into submission through pure strength and technique. This seems counterintuitive. You have weapons. The Draugr might have weapons. Why not just stab it until it stops moving? Because that doesn't work. The sagas are explicit about this. Heroes who tried weapon-based approaches found that Draugr don't die from being stabbed, cut, or impaled. They're corpses. Corpses don't care about bleeding out or organ damage. They're already past that stage of vulnerability. Decapitation might work, but you can't decapitate something that's actively fighting you. You need to immobilize it first, which brings us back to wrestling. Once you've wrestled it into submission, pinned it to the ground where it can't get leverage, then you can go for the head. Use its own sword if available. The symbolism of killing something with its own weapon appeals to Norse sensibilities. After decapitation, you burn the body, both pieces. Head and body separately if you're being thorough. The fire needs to be hot enough and sustained enough to reduce everything to ash. This isn't a quick cremation. You're burning something that doesn't want to burn, that might try to reassemble itself, that carries supernatural resistance to destruction. Once you have ash, you scatter it, preferably in the ocean or running water. The idea is to separate the remains so thoroughly that reconstitution becomes impossible. Spread the ash across miles of ocean, and the Draugr can't pull itself back together. Each particle is isolated, neutralized, rendered permanently inert. Some traditions add additional steps. Drive a wooden stake through the body before decapitation. This supposedly pins the Draugr's spirit, though if you've already wrestled it into submission and you're about to decapitate it, the stake seems redundant. But redundancy in supernatural pest control is just good practice. The wrestling requirement deserves deeper examination because it seems like a deliberate handicap. Why must you fight barehanded? The sagas suggest that weapons don't work because they're too impersonal. The Draugr needs to be defeated in direct physical contest. Strength against strength, will against will. Using weapons creates distance. Distance means you haven't truly conquered it. There's probably also practical reasoning. Inside a burial mound, swinging swords is difficult. Low ceilings. Confined space. Close quarters favor grappling over blade work. The wrestling requirement might reflect actual fighting conditions rather than purely spiritual considerations. The heroes who succeed at this are uniformly described as exceptionally strong. Grettir was the strongest man in Iceland. Other successful Draugr fighters were renowned for physical power. This isn't work for average people. You need substantial strength advantage just to have a chance. And even then, the Draugr gets stronger as you fight. Your strength advantage diminishes over time. Technique matters too. The sagas describe specific moves: getting behind the Draugr, avoiding the eyes, using leverage and positioning rather than pure strength. These read like actual wrestling technique, not just they fought and the hero won. The details suggest these stories preserve practical knowledge about how to grapple with something superhuman. The psychological challenge is immense. You're wrestling a corpse. It smells like death. It's cold to the touch. It might be growing larger as you fight. Its face is inches from yours, and you must not look at its eyes. Meanwhile, it's trying to crush you, curse you, or both. Maintaining focus under these conditions requires extraordinary mental discipline. Failed attempts make everything worse. You damage the Draugr, but don't destroy it completely. It comes back angrier. You burn the body, but miss some pieces. Those pieces might regenerate. You scatter the ashes insufficiently. The Draugr might reassemble over time. Every partial success is actually a failure that creates a more dangerous enemy. This creates a completion problem. You can't do this halfway. You can't wound a Draugr and escape to try again later. You commit fully, or you don't start. And commitment means possibly dying in a burial mound, wrestling a corpse while covered in grave dirt and supernatural stench. Career options in medieval Iceland were certainly diverse. The burning specifically must be thorough. Some accounts describe Draugr regenerating from single bones. You need complete combustion. Every bone, every scrap of tissue, reduced to fine ash. This takes hours and considerable fuel. You're maintaining a fire hot enough to burn bone while making sure the Draugr's remains don't crawl out of the flames. Full-time job with terrible working conditions. The ocean disposal serves multiple purposes. Water is purifying in Norse belief. Running water carries things away. The ocean is vast and deep. Even if the Draugr could somehow reconstitute, doing so from ash scattered across the North Atlantic seems logistically challenging, even for supernatural creatures. You're not just destroying the body. You're ensuring permanent separation of all components. Alternative methods exist, but are less reliable. Some communities buried Draugr in remote locations with heavy stones. This contained rather than destroyed them. Cheaper than burning. But the Draugr remained technically active, just imprisoned. And prisons fail eventually. Christian methods involved priests performing exorcisms. The Doordum in Eyrbyggja saga describes a legal religious ritual where each Draugr is summoned to a door, given judgment, and commanded to leave. This worked for that particular outbreak. Whether it's generally applicable or situation-specific isn't clear. Also requires having priests who are willing to legally argue with the undead. Specialized clergy. Magic users could bind or banish Draugr using sorcery. But this was pre-Christian magic, which Christianization suppressed. The knowledge became rare. By the saga period, most people didn't have access to magical solutions. You got wrestling or you got nothing. Community action helped. Groups working together could restrain a Draugr more easily than individuals. One person wrestles while others prepare the fire. Someone keeps watch to prevent the Draugr from escaping. Someone else protects the first wrestler if things go wrong. Teamwork makes the impossible merely extremely dangerous. The success rate was apparently low. The sagas preserve stories of successful Draugr defeats because those are exceptional. The unsuccessful attempts don't get recorded except as tragic footnotes. And then everyone in the farmstead died mysteriously. Probably means a Draugr was involved and nobody stopped it. Prevention remained the better strategy. Don't create Draugr through proper burial. Don't disturb existing burial mounds. Don't antagonize people who might become Draugr when they die. Much easier than fighting them after the fact, though significantly less heroic. No sagas about people who successfully avoided supernatural problems through good planning and risk avoidance. Modern zombie media usually gives survivors effective tools. Guns work, fireworks, destroying the brain works. The Draugr looks at this and laughs in Old Norse. You want effective tools? Try your hands, some rope, a very hot fire, and a boat to scatter ashes from. Bring friends, pray to multiple gods. Accept you might fail and make things worse. Very empowering approach to undead combat. Really instills confidence. Let's discuss what the Draugr teaches us about Norse attitudes toward death, because the creature encodes specific cultural beliefs about mortality, honor, and the afterlife. The Norse had complicated death arrangements. Die honorably in battle, go to Valhalla, and feast with Odin until Ragnarok. Die dishonorably or from old age, go to Hell's realm and exist in diminished capacity. Die cursed, greedy, or angry, maybe become a Draugr and stay in your burial mound forever guarding treasure nobody can use. These aren't random outcomes. They're consequences. Your death reflects your life. Your afterlife reflects your death. The system has internal logic. Be honorable and brave. Die fighting. Earn Valhalla. Simple path. Difficult execution. But what if you don't want Valhalla? What if you're more attached to your gold than to eternal combat? What if you value revenge over peaceful rest? The Draugr represents choosing material world over spiritual progression. It's active choice, even if unconscious. These people can't let go, so they don't. This creates interesting commentary on wealth. The Draugr guard treasure that has no value to them. They're dead. They can't spend gold, can't use weapons, can't enjoy jewelry, but they guard it anyway because the attachment survived death. The folly of material obsession, demonstrated through undead violence. The contagion aspect suggests death can spread through murder. Kill someone, and you might create another killer. Even if you kill them back, they might rise and continue the cycle. Violence begets violence, even across the life-death boundary. Very poetic. Also very practical concern if you're living in medieval Iceland, where feuds could last generations. The curse ability shows that dying words carry power. Your final statement matters. This encouraged people to be careful about causing deaths. Will this person curse me with their dying breath? Will that curse stick? Medieval anger management through supernatural threat. The shape-shifting and weather control suggest death doesn't end your connection to the natural world. You become part of it differently. Less spirit moves on, and more spirit stays, but with new physics. The boundary between living, dead, and natural forces becomes permeable. Everything connects. The fact that Draugr target their former communities is significant. They don't wander to random places. They haunt specific people and locations. Your relationships continue after death, just in more hostile form. This reinforces community bonds. Don't wrong people. They might become undead, and remember, the intelligence remaining after death is crucial. Norse culture valued intelligence, cunning, strategy. If death erased your mind, that would be tragic loss. But the Draugr retains intelligence, just applies it to malicious purposes. Better than nothing? Debatable. But it suggests the essence of person survives physical death. The requirement for physical destruction, rather than spiritual banishment, is telling. Norse culture was pragmatic. They built ships, farmed difficult land, survived harsh conditions through practical skill. Their undead solution is similarly practical. Don't pray it away. Wrestle it. Burn it. Scatter the ashes. Problem solved through physical action. The smell serving as warning shows respect for human survival instinct. The universe isn't completely unfair. It gives you signs. The Draugr announces itself through odor. This isn't subtle, but it's information. Whether you use that information effectively is your responsibility. The seasonal variation in activity reflects Norse environmental awareness. Everything in nature has rhythms. The Draugr isn't exempt from natural cycles just because it's supernatural. It's still bound to darkness, cold, winter. It operates within rules, even if those rules aren't quite normal physics. The prevention measures demonstrate control through ritual. You can't prevent death, but you can influence what happens after death through proper ceremony. This gives communities agency. You're not helpless against fate. You have tools if you use them correctly. The fact that heroes must use bare hands suggests some things require direct confrontation. You can't delegate everything. Can't hide behind technology or weapons. Sometimes you must personally face the problem. This builds character, or it kills you. Either way, it's definitive. The treasure motivation reveals ambivalence about wealth. Yes, treasure is valuable and desirable, but obsessing over it creates problems. The wealthiest people buried with the most treasure often became the most dangerous Draugr. Maybe there's a lesson about material attachment and its consequences. The preservation of the body, rather than decay, mirrors Christian resurrection beliefs emerging during this period. Bodies matter for the afterlife. They're not just vessels to be discarded. This tension between pagan and Christian eschatology shows up in how Draugr work. They're preserved for resurrection, but corrupted into monsters. The geographical binding suggests place matters. You can't escape your history and location. Where you lived, where you died, where you're buried. These define your undead existence. Your choices create your territory, and you're stuck with it. Medieval urban planning through supernatural consequence. Norse culture used supernatural threats to encode social rules. The Draugr taught multiple lessons simultaneously. Honor matters. Burial practices matter. Community relationships matter. Material attachment is dangerous. Violence has consequences. Death doesn't end agency. All wrapped up in scary story about undead treasure guarders. Educational content delivery system, optimized for retention through terror. Pedagogically questionable, but apparently effective. Now let's examine specific historical cases of alleged Draugr activity, because these weren't just campfire stories. Medieval Icelanders recorded encounters they claimed were real events. The Eyrbyggja saga contains one of the most detailed Draugr outbreak narratives. It starts with Horguna, a wealthy woman who dies during a sickness epidemic. Her dying request was specific burial instructions. The family ignored those instructions to save money. This turned out to be expensive in different ways. Strange events began immediately. Ogunna's ghost appeared repeatedly. Then other dead from the epidemic started returning. One by one, the victims rose. They'd come to the farmhouse at Froi, sick by the fire, wring water from their clothes as if they'd drowned, and refused to leave. The living residents tried various solutions. Built bigger fires to drive them away through heat and light. Didn't work. The dead just moved closer to the warmth. Held Christian door-doom ceremony where they legally summoned each Draugr, gave judgment, and commanded them to depart. This actually worked. Each Draugr, when formally addressed and ordered out, left. The house was then purified with holy water. This case is interesting because it shows both old and new methods. The door-doom combined Norse legal procedure with Christian ritual. The community couldn't just burn down their own farmhouse. They needed non-destructive solution. They innovated by applying existing frameworks to new problem. Grettir's encounters are the most famous. Before Glámr, he fought the Draugr Kar in Glámr. Grettir broke into Kar's burial mound looking for treasure. Kar was sitting inside, surrounded by gold, still wearing his armor. When Grettir approached, Kar attacked. They fought inside the mound in complete darkness, except for Grettir's torch. Kar had size and strength advantages. Grettir had youth and desperation. Eventually Grettir decapitated Kar, took the sword Karsnauder, and left with some treasure. He burned Kar's remains the next day. Textbook successful Draugr defeat. Grettir made it look easy. Then came Glámr. We've discussed this before, but the details matter. Glámr was killed by something else first. Possibly another Draugr, possibly something worse. He became a Draugr and terrorized Forselidale for months. Multiple families fled. Animals died. The valley became uninhabitable. Grettir arrived, confident from his previous success. The fight was brutal and extended. Glámr kept growing stronger. Grettir barely won, and only through luck as much as skill. The curse Glámr delivered haunted Grettir for 20 years. This demonstrates the difference between manageable Draugr, like Kar, and catastrophic ones, like Glámr. Hrólfr Bígafadr's case shows community-scale response. Hrólfr was cruel landowner in life. He died and immediately became active as a Draugr, killed shepherds, drove people mad, made the entire district dangerous. His own son tried to stop him, failed, eventually needed outside help. The solution involved digging up the body, discovering it was preserved and death blue, carrying it to a remote location, burning it thoroughly, and burying the ashes far from any settlement. This took multiple people, significant resources, and community coordination. One person couldn't handle it. Required social mobilization. The Romandar saga Gripsiner describes Rein, a berserker who died and became a Draugr. He could transform into a cat creature with long claws. He was described as black and huge, roaring loudly and blowing fire. The fire-breathing detail appears rarely in Draugr lore. Might be specific to Rein, or might be literary exaggeration. Vigarapur Sumaruzasan appears in Laxdila saga. He was murderer in life called Killer Rap. After death, he became Draugr and continued killing. He could shapeshift into a seal with human eyes, used this form to sink ships. Eventually, his body was dug up, moved to a remote coast, and burned. Even then, the evil remained associated with that location. The common pattern across cases. Initial disturbance leads to haunting. Haunting escalates. Community tries mild solutions. Those fail. Eventually, they commit to total destruction. The escalation is predictable, but communities seem reluctant to go straight to burning bodies. Social, religious, or practical constraints prevent immediate drastic action. Another pattern. Wealthy or powerful people become more dangerous Draugr. They have more treasure to guard, more enemies to punish, more reasons to refuse moving on. Status in life correlates with threat level in undeath. The solution medieval Iceland apparently needed was progressive taxation to reduce post-mortem violence risk. The geographic clustering is notable. Certain areas had multiple Draugr cases. Was this because those areas had conditions that produced Draugr? Because they had people willing to record encounters? Because belief was stronger there, so interpretations favored supernatural explanation? Probably combination. The timing is interesting too. Most recorded cases are from after Christianization, but reference pre-Christian beliefs. This creates hybrid situations where Christian solutions like Door Doom exist alongside pagan concepts like burial mound hauntings. Cultural transition period preserved in undead encounters. The credibility question is complicated. Were these real supernatural events? Hallucinations? Misidentifications? Social fictions created to explain deaths? The saga writers present them as factual. The communities involved acted as if real. Whether modern readers believe doesn't change that historical populations did. What's certain is that medieval Icelanders developed and maintained elaborate procedures for handling potential Draugr. They invested significant resources in prevention and response. This suggests genuine fear, whether or not the threat was objectively real. Fear has consequences, regardless of its foundation. Recorded history that doubles as supernatural pest control manual. Very efficient documentation system. 0 stars for archival organization, but full marks for practical applicability. Let's discuss the role of women in Draugr encounters, because the sagas focus on male heroes, but women appear in crucial supporting roles, and occasionally as Draugr themselves. Horgona, mentioned earlier, is the most prominent female Draugr. She was wealthy, foreign-born, owned fine possessions. Her requests about burial and property distribution were ignored. This triggered the Frohe haunting. Her ghost returned repeatedly until her requests were honored. Once they complied posthumously, her haunting stopped. She wanted proper respect. When denied, she escalated until she got it. This reveals something about power dynamics. In life, Horgona couldn't force compliance. In death, as a Draugr, she could. Undeath provided leverage that living status didn't. Whether this is empowerment or tragedy depends on perspective. She got what she wanted, but had to die and become a monster to achieve it. Other women appear as victims of Draugr. Wives who lose husbands, mothers who lose children. They experience the personal cost of undead violence, while men get the heroic narrative of fighting them. The saga tells you about Grettir's brave battle. It mentions less often the families destroyed while communities waited for a hero to arrive. Women also maintain knowledge of prevention. The elaborate burial rituals, the protective charms, the warning signs. Older women particularly served as repositories of supernatural lore. They teach younger generations what practices prevented Draugr, what symptoms indicated haunting, what measures protected vulnerable people. This knowledge transmission was crucial. Without it, each generation would need to relearn from experience. The cost in lives and suffering would be enormous. The women who preserved and taught these practices were doing essential community service, even if they never fought a Draugr directly. Some women served as seers or magic users. They could detect Draugr, predict their movements, sometimes banish them through ritual. This was dangerous work. The Christianization period made traditional magic socially problematic. Women practicing old magic risked accusations of witchcraft. But they were also the only ones with skills to handle certain supernatural problems. Female Draugr are rarer in sagas, but exist. Usually they were wealthy women attached to their possessions, or wronged women seeking revenge. They had the same powers as male Draugr. The gender didn't limit supernatural capabilities. Dead is dead. Angry is angry. Physical strength matters less when you have supernatural enhancement. The mother-child dynamic appears in warnings about Draugr. Mothers protecting children from undead threats. Mothers warning children about burial mounds. Mothers teaching prevention. This positions women as primary defenders of the next generation against supernatural danger, even if they don't personally fight Draugr. Some accounts mention women identifying potential Draugr before death. That person will not rest quietly. This prediction served as warning. Extra precautions would be taken at burial. The woman's insight, based on observing the person's life and character, helped prevent future problems. Preventive supernatural medicine through social observation. Women appeared in support roles during Draugr confrontations, preparing fire for burning the body, gathering materials for barriers, providing food and shelter for heroes. These contributions enabled the actual combat. The hero got glory. The support network got acknowledgement if they were lucky. The emphasis on male heroes fighting Draugr probably reflects saga audience expectations more than historical reality. These stories were told at feasts to men, celebrating masculine virtues. The woman who maintained protective rituals for 40 years isn't as exciting narratively as the man who wrestled an undead warrior once, but both roles were necessary. Without prevention, Draugr outbreaks would be constant. Without intervention when prevention failed, communities would be destroyed. The system needed both. Recognizing only one creates incomplete picture. Female perspectives on Draugr might differ from male ones. Men saw glory and danger. Women might see community health issue requiring management. Men focused on individual heroism. Women might focus on collective safety. Both valid. Both addressing same problem from different angles. The saga tradition preserved male perspectives primarily. What women thought about Draugr, how they strategized about prevention, what their experiences were during outbreaks, this gets less documentation. We can infer from actions, but direct voices are mostly absent. Historical record reflects recorder bias. Modern retellings sometimes center women more prominently, give them agency, show their contributions. This corrects historical imbalance, but creates different questions about authenticity. Are we recovering lost history or projecting modern values backward? Probably both. The past is complicated. What's clear? Women interacted with Draugr threat constantly, even if their interactions looked different from male heroes' wrestling matches. They maintained the systems that made occasional wrestling matches sufficient, instead of requiring constant warfare with undead. Support infrastructure for supernatural pest control never gets exciting narratives. Turns out preventing problems is less cinematically compelling than solving them violently. Who knew? Let's examine the psychological impact of living in a culture that believes in Draugr, because constant supernatural threat affects society beyond individual encounters. Everyone knows burial mounds dot the landscape. Everyone knows some contain treasure. Everyone also knows disturbing them risks Draugr attack. This creates perpetual temptation versus danger calculation. The gold is real and valuable. The threat might be real or might be superstition. Every potential grave robber must decide which they believe. The doubt itself is psychologically wearing. You don't fully believe in Draugr, but you don't fully disbelieve either. So you're cautious around burial mounds while feeling slightly ridiculous about it. This middle state is exhausting. Certainty in either direction would be easier. Parents teaching children about Draugr face difficult balance. Teach too much, create excessive fear. Teach too little, risk child disturbing something dangerous. The optimal level of supernatural paranoia for children is non-obvious. The smell-based warning system means certain odors trigger immediate fear response. Any whiff of decay, any unexpected foul smell, everyone immediately thinks Draugr. This creates false positives constantly. Dead animal in the woods? Momentary panic. Spoiled food? Brief terror. The fear conditioning doesn't distinguish well between threats and coincidences. Living near old burial mounds creates ambient dread. You see them daily. Wonder if something is inside. Notice when your livestock avoid the area. Every unexplained event gets interpreted through supernatural lens first, natural causes second. This is cognitive load that compounds over time. The seasonal variation in Draugr activity means winter brings not just cold and darkness, but also increased supernatural threat. An already difficult season becomes psychologically worse. Summer is relief in multiple ways. Warmth, light, and relative undead safety. Communities that experienced actual Draugr outbreaks develop collective trauma. Even after the specific threat is eliminated, the fear remains. That farmstead where everyone died? Nobody wants to live there now. The valley where Draugr walked. People avoid it. The psychological scarring lasts generations beyond the immediate danger. The curse aspect is particularly insidious. You might defeat a Draugr successfully, but still suffer consequences. Grettir won his fight with Glámr. The curse destroyed his life anyway. This means victory isn't clean. You can do everything right and still lose. Very demoralizing for would-be heroes. The intelligence of Draugr makes them scarier than mindless threats. They remember, they plan, they hold grudges. You can't just avoid them spatially. They'll find you if they want to. This removes sense of control that geographic avoidance usually provides. The contagion risk means every Draugr death is potentially the first death in an outbreak. That shepherd killed last week might rise tonight. Better take precautions. But which precautions? How much is enough? The uncertainty breeds anxiety. The requirement for extreme measures, wrestling and burning, means most people can't respond effectively to Draugr threat. You need a hero, and heroes are busy, or dead, or cursed. So you might identify a Draugr problem, but lack capacity to solve it. Helplessness while danger persists is psychologically devastating. Children growing up hearing these stories develop specific fear profiles. Darkness becomes threatening. Burial mounds become scary. Death itself becomes more complicated than just sad. It's sad plus potentially dangerous. This shapes how they approach mortality throughout life. The shape-shifting ability means you can't trust appearances. That bull might be a Draugr. That seal might be undead. Ordinary animals become potentially threatening. This creates hypervigilance that's exhausting to maintain. The fact that Draugr target former associates means social relationships carry post-mortem risk. Wrong someone in life, they might seek revenge in death. This adds supernatural consequence to interpersonal conflict. Dispute resolution becomes more important when grudges can outlast mortality. The preservation rather than decay means the dead don't become safely distant through decomposition. They remain recognizably themselves. Fighting a Draugr means fighting something that looks like the person it was. Psychologically difficult in ways that fighting an unrecognizable zombie isn't. The community knowledge that proper burial prevents problems creates guilt if prevention fails. We didn't do the rituals correctly. We cut corners. Now someone's dead, and it's partially our fault. This converts supernatural threat into moral burden. The stories circulate constantly. Every feast, someone tells a Draugr tale. This maintains cultural knowledge, but also maintains fear. You can't forget about Draugr because society keeps reminding you. Might be necessary for survival. Also might be causing psychological damage. Both can be true. Modern readers might think, just don't believe in them. But belief isn't voluntary when everyone around you believes. When social structures assume truth, when practical decisions depend on treating threat as real, you're embedded in belief system whether you want to be or not. Living with culturally sanctioned supernatural terror as background condition. Very healthy for community mental health. Absolutely no long-term psychological consequences whatsoever. Now let's discuss how Draugr compare to other cultural undead traditions. Because they get stronger when you fight it, mechanic is surprisingly rare in global folklore. Chinese jiangshi hop toward victims and are repelled by sticky rice. Manageable threat with accessible countermeasure. Romanian strigoi can be killed with silver or decapitation. Straightforward if expensive. Japanese onryu can be appeased through proper burial and respect. Emotional solution to emotional problem. Greek vrykolakas can be destroyed by cutting off the head and boiling it in vinegar. Unpleasant but effective. The Draugr? Wrestle it barehanded. Hope you're strong enough. Hope it doesn't curse you. Decapitate it with its own weapon. Burn everything. Scatter ashes at sea. Intermediate steps include getting stronger as you fail to kill it, and possibly making things worse through incomplete destruction. Very user-friendly monster. Excellent accessibility design for average citizens. Most undead traditions give you clear defeat conditions. Find the weakness. Exploit it. Problem solved. The Draugr's defeat condition is overpower it physically while it's actively adapting to your attacks. Then execute multi-step disposal procedure without making mistakes. There's a reason Grettir was famous. Most people can't meet these requirements. The intelligence comparison is interesting too. Zombies are mindless. Vampires are intelligent, but follow rules. The Draugr is intelligent and makes its own rules. It remembers who you are, what you did, where you live. It plans, it adapts. It holds conversations while trying to kill you. Very sporting. European vampires seduce victims through charm and hypnosis. The Draugr just grows to the size of an ox and crushes you. Different approaches to the same problem. One emphasizes subtlety and manipulation. The other emphasizes becoming physically larger than the problem and sitting on it until it stops moving. The treasure-guarding motivation is fairly unique. Most undead are driven by hunger, revenge, or curse. The Draugr adds property rights enforcement to that list. It's defending assets. You wouldn't want to live next to someone who breaks into graves? Well, the Draugr feels the same way about grave robbers. Everyone's got boundaries. The smell as warning system appears in some other traditions, but rarely as prominently. Most monsters try to be stealthy. The Draugr announces itself through olfactory aura. This is either considerate warning system or proof that it's confident enough not to need stealth. Possibly both. The contagion mechanism resembles zombie epidemiology more than vampire transmission. Get killed, rise as one yourself. But unlike zombies, you retain full intelligence and personality. You're not infected with mindlessness. You're infected with death and malice while keeping your cognitive function. Worse in some ways. You can't blame your actions on instinct. The shape-shifting is more diverse than most shape-shifting traditions. Werewolves turn into wolves. The Draugr turns into seals, bulls, cats, horses, or fog, depending on what's tactically useful. Full morphological flexibility. Very adaptable skill set. The curse ability is particularly nasty compared to other monsters. Sure, vampires can enthrall you. Ghosts can possess you. But the Draugr can curse you to live long enough to suffer comprehensively. Glámr cursed Grettir to fear darkness, lose strength growth, and die badly. That's targeted long-term psychological damage that outlasts the actual encounter. Weather control is unusual for undead generally. That's typically god or wizard territory. The Draugr has it as standard feature. Summon storms, create fog, call darkness. Very comprehensive power set for something that's supposed to be just a reanimated corpse. The preservation rather than decay distinguishes Draugr from most corpse-based undead. Zombies rot. Draugr bloat but stay functional. They're not falling apart. They're expanding, becoming more. This is opposite trajectory from normal decomposition. Biology running backward and wrong. The requirement for wrestling specifically is nearly unique. Most monster fighting traditions allow weapons. The Draugr tradition says weapons are insufficient. You must grapple. Must personally overcome it through direct contact. This is either spiritual requirement or practical limitation of burial mound combat. Either way, unusual. The getting stronger mechanic is the rarest element. A few video game enemies do this. Some mythological creatures grow larger when angered. But sustained combat performance scaling, where the enemy literally levels up as you fight, almost unique to Draugr. The game difficulty adjusts upward in real time, based on your failure to win quickly enough. Most folklore monsters can be killed if you're brave and prepared enough. The Draugr can be killed if you're extraordinarily strong, specifically trained, properly equipped, lucky, and ideally blessed by multiple gods. And even then, you might get cursed. The barrier to entry for successful Draugr combat is MBA level compared to other monsters' high school diploma. The Norse clearly designed their undead with endgame players in mind. Entry-level threats were trolls and ghosts. Draugr were prestige boss encounters, requiring maxed-out character builds. Very thoughtful difficulty scaling for their mythological content. Let's examine why the Get Stronger mechanic specifically resonates in modern retellings. Because this element keeps getting emphasized in contemporary versions. Video games love it. The Elder Scrolls Draugr get more dangerous as you level up. This maintains challenge across player progression. You're stronger. They're proportionally stronger. The encounter stays relevant. From game design perspective, it's brilliant. Self-balancing difficulty through enemy scaling. This also creates the frustrating loop that makes good gameplay. You fight, struggle, barely survive. Level up. Return confident. Fight again. Struggle again. Your improvement is matched by enemy improvement. You can't just outlevel the content. Must improve in skill, not just stats. Very educational about the difference between numerical advantage and actual competence. The psychological element translates well to games too. Players expect to grow stronger and dominate previous threats. Draugr violate this expectation. They grow with you. This is disorienting. Violates game logic most players internalize. Creates memorable frustration, which sounds bad, but actually increases engagement. People remember the fights that challenged them. Horror media uses the mechanic for similar reasons. Characters discovering that attacking makes things worse creates good story tension. A monster isn't just powerful, it's adaptive. Your standard solutions fail. Must innovate. This forces character development and creative problem solving beyond hit it harder. The mechanic also serves as metaphor. Trauma gets worse when you engage with it wrong. Addiction strengthens through unsuccessful attempts to quit. Anger feeds itself when expressed violently. The Draugr that grows stronger as you fight. It represents problems that resist direct confrontation. This gives the creature thematic depth beyond just being scary. Modern audiences appreciate complexity. Simple monsters are fine, but monsters with interesting mechanics are better. The Draugr's combat scaling makes it mechanically interesting in ways that powerful zombie doesn't. It's not just strong. It's strong in specifically frustrating ways that require strategy beyond bring more firepower. The curse element adds consequence beyond immediate combat. Win the fight, but lose the war through curse. This appeals to writers who want lasting impact from monster encounters. The hero doesn't just kill the monster and move on. The monster marks them permanently. Even victory has cost. The intelligence makes it more threatening to modern audiences who've been trained to recognize that smart enemies are scarier than strong ones. The Draugr is both. It's physically superior and mentally capable. Can't outsmart it through simple tricks. Can't overpower it through simple violence. Must engage on multiple levels simultaneously. The greed motivation provides character depth. The Draugr isn't random evil. It wants specific thing, treasure or revenge, or just to be left alone in its mound. This makes it almost sympathetic. It has understandable goal, even if its methods are horrific. Contemporary audiences like morally complex monsters. The preservation of personality after death creates horror through recognition. This wasn't always a monster. It was a person. Their personality survived. Their humanity didn't. The gap between who they were and what they are is where the horror lives. Modern psychological horror uses this extensively. The community response dynamics offer storytelling opportunities. Can't just have one hero kill it. Need community preparation, support, follow through. This allows ensemble casts. Multiple characters with roles. Teamwork against supernatural threat. Very contemporary narrative structure. The failure possibility is crucial. Modern audiences know heroes usually win. But Draugr have good track record of cursing, crippling, or killing heroes. The threat feels real because success isn't guaranteed. Even successful heroes suffer consequences. This adds stakes that pure power fantasy monsters can't provide. The mechanic also works as game design lesson. Players learning that continuing failed strategy makes things worse is valuable. The Draugr teaches, don't repeatedly try what's not working. Must adapt, must change approach, must recognize when you're in losing situation. Educational content disguised as monster encounter. For writers, the scaling difficulty creates natural pacing. First encounter goes badly. Barely escape. Prepare better. Second encounter goes less badly. Learn more. Third encounter may be successful, but costly. 3-act structure built into monster mechanics. Very convenient for narrative construction. The mythology provides authenticity. This isn't modern invention. It's thousand-year-old monster from actual cultural tradition. Contemporary creators can use it knowing they're drawing from deep well of established lore. Gives weight and legitimacy that purely invented monsters lack. The Draugr has lasted a millennium because its core mechanics are good design. Whether accidental or intentional, Norse storytellers created monster that scales well, creates interesting challenge, forces creative solution, and leaves lasting impact. Modern creators recognize good design and iterate on it. Horror that adapts to resistance. Boss fight with level matching. Metaphor for problems that strengthen through mishandled confrontation. Pick your interpretation. All work. That's well-designed monster. Let's discuss what the Draugr reveals about how fear functions as social control, because supernatural threats maintain community standards through terror. Don't rob graves. The Draugr will kill you. This preserves burial sites and the treasure therein. Benefits. Deceased keep their grave goods. Families keep their ancestral wealth. Community respects the dead. Drawbacks. Substantial wealth remains buried and unused while people starve. The Draugr serves as enforcer for property rights that extend beyond death. Don't wrong people. They might become Draugr and punish you. This encourages conflict resolution and ethical behavior. Benefits. Less violence, more cooperation, stable social relations. Drawbacks. Impossible to verify threat. Might cause excessive compliance with unreasonable people. Creates permanent anxiety about past actions. Perform proper burial rituals. Cutting corners creates Draugr. This maintains religious and cultural practices. Benefits. Community cohesion through shared ritual. Employment for people who know proper ceremonies. Respect for tradition. Drawbacks. Expensive, time-consuming, might perpetuate practices that don't actually prevent anything. Don't wander at night. Draugr are active. This keeps people home after dark. Benefits. Prevents accidents, maintains household units, reduces opportunities for crime or socially disruptive behavior. Drawbacks. Limits freedom, prevents night activities that might be beneficial, creates fear of natural darkness. Listen to elders. They know about supernatural threats. This preserves knowledge transmission and respects hierarchy. Benefits. Traditional knowledge survives. Experienced people maintain authority. Communities don't repeatedly make same mistakes. Drawbacks. Stifles innovation, perpetuates outdated practices, prevents younger generation from questioning or improving systems. The beauty of using supernatural threat for social control is unfalsifiability. You can't prove Draugr don't exist. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. So the threat remains perpetually credible to believers. And even skeptics might comply because risk-reward calculation favors caution. This creates stable equilibrium. Most people follow rules. Few test them. Those who test them and survive either get lucky or become cautionary tales about how they would have survived if they'd followed proper procedure. System is self-reinforcing. The costs are psychological. Living under constant supernatural threat creates chronic stress. This stress serves function, keeping people compliant, but it also damages mental health, limits flourishing, constrains human potential. The social order is maintained, but individuals pay price. Modern societies use different control mechanisms, legal systems, police, social consequences, economic incentives. These are arguably more rational than supernatural threats. They're also arguably less effective because they're escapable. Move to different jurisdiction, change social groups, make different economic choices. But you can't escape the Draugr through bureaucratic maneuvering. It knows you, remembers you, will find you. Supernatural social control is inescapable in ways that rational systems aren't. Whether this is strength or horror depends on your position in social hierarchy. The Draugr specifically targets grave robbers and those who wrong others. These are community problems. Grave robbing removes wealth and disrespects ancestors. Interpersonal violence creates feuds and instability. A monster that punishes exactly these behaviors is socially useful monster, aligned with community interest. Of course, alignment with community interest doesn't mean alignment with individual interest. The person who desperately needs treasure from burial mound to feed family has individual incentive to rob it. Community has interest in preventing robbery. The Draugr enforces community preference over individual need. This works well for community as whole, less well for desperate individuals. The question becomes, are these genuine beliefs, or are they useful fictions maintained by people who benefit from them? Wealthy families benefit from Draugr protecting grave goods. Social elites benefit from supernatural enforcement of hierarchy. Religious authorities benefit from complex burial rites. Only they can perform properly. Cynical interpretation. Draugr beliefs persist because they serve power structures. Generous interpretation. Beliefs persist because they actually prevented real problems. Most likely, combination. Some Draugr encounters were real in whatever sense matters to participants. Some were useful social fictions, distinguishing which is impossible from historical distance. What's certain, societies that believed in Draugr behaved differently than societies that didn't. The belief had effects regardless of truth value. This is social control functioning exactly as designed. Whether designed by humans manipulating others, or by genuine supernatural threat teaching, humans through consequences doesn't change outcome. Fear-based social systems eventually collapse or transform. Iceland Christianized. Social structures changed. Economic systems evolved. The Draugr threat diminished or was reinterpreted. But while it functioned, it maintained specific social order effectively. Can't argue with centuries of results, even if you can argue with the methodology. Modern societies largely abandon supernatural social control in favor of ostensibly rational systems. Whether this is progress or just different form of manipulation is philosophical question. The Draugr at least had the courtesy to be straightforward. Rob graves, monster kills you. Very clear cause and effect. Modern systems are substantially more complicated and possibly more manipulative through their complexity. Social control through undead violence. Primitive and brutal. Also honest about what it is and what it does. You know exactly where you stand with the Draugr. Modern social control could learn from this transparency. Finally, let's discuss what happens when Draugr encounter other Norse supernatural beings, because medieval Iceland wasn't just populated by the undead. The sagas mention trolls, elves, dwarves, giants, and various nature spirits. These creatures presumably coexisted with Draugr in the same landscape. The question is whether they interacted, cooperated, or fought among themselves. The sources are frustratingly vague on supernatural politics. Trolls appear in some of the same regions as Draugr. They're also dangerous, also territorial, also violent toward humans. But trolls are living creatures, not undead. They eat, they breed, they have their own society separate from humans. The Draugr is former human who refused to stay dead. Different origin stories. Some accounts suggest trolls and Draugr avoided each other. Trolls stayed in mountains and caves. Draugr stayed in burial mounds and former homes. Geographic separation prevented conflict. This might be accidental, or might reflect mutual respect between dangerous creatures, or mutual caution. Even supernatural threats practice risk management. One saga mentions a troll being killed near a burial mound. The next night, both the troll's body and a Draugr were gone. Did the Draugr consume the troll? Did the troll rise as some kind of hybrid? Did they fight and destroy each other? The saga doesn't specify, just notes that both disappeared and the area became doubly haunted. Very helpful documentation. Elves in Norse tradition are ambiguous creatures, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful, always powerful and capricious. They live in rocks, hills, and underground. Some burial mounds were built on elf-inhabited hills. This was either terrible planning or deliberate strategy. Put the undead where the elves already live. Let them sort it out themselves. The accounts that mention both elves and Draugr suggest uneasy coexistence. Elves might mislead travelers toward Draugr mounds, or they might warn people away from particularly dangerous ones. Their motivations aren't explained. Maybe they found undead neighbors annoying. Maybe they enjoyed watching humans deal with Draugr. Maybe they had non-aggression pact. Supernatural diplomacy is poorly documented. Dwarves lived deep underground according to the sagas. They crafted magical items. They were skilled but dangerous to deal with. Some burial mounds were deep enough that you might theoretically encounter both Draugr and dwarf territory. Whether this ever happened isn't recorded, probably because anyone who encountered both didn't survive to report. Giants were largely extinct or distant by the saga period, but some accounts place giant burial sites near human ones. Did giants become Draugr when they died? Were they subject to same rules? Or did their size and power exempt them from normal undead mechanics? The sources don't address this. Probably because asking a giant if it plans to rise as Draugr after death is poor conversation strategy. Nature spirits, Landvidr, inhabited specific locations. They could be appeased or angered. Building burial mounds disturbed them. This might make them hostile. But would angry nature spirit fight a Draugr? Or would they consider the Draugr just another territorial entity to negotiate with? The relationship between various supernatural forces is unclear. Some accounts suggest that particularly powerful Draugr could command lesser supernatural beings. Animals, certainly, possibly minor spirits. This would make them apex predators in supernatural ecosystem. Other creatures avoid them not through negotiation, but through recognition of superior force. The practical impact for humans is that supernatural threats stacked. You're not just worried about Draugr. You're worried about Draugr and trolls and elves and nature spirits and whatever else inhabits the landscape. Medieval Scandinavia had dense supernatural population. Humans were minority species in some regions. This created complex risk assessment. Is that burial mound dangerous because of the Draugr inside? Or because it's on Elf Hill? Or both? Your prevention measures need to address multiple threat types. Salt and ironwork on some creatures, not on others. You need comprehensive supernatural defense strategy. The stories about heroes fighting Draugr rarely mention other creatures intervening. This suggests either the fights happened quickly enough that other beings didn't notice, or other beings practiced non-intervention policy regarding Draugr combat. Or the storytellers just didn't include those details because they complicated the narrative. Modern fantasy often portrays supernatural creatures as organized factions with clear relationships. Norse sources suggest more chaotic reality. Various dangerous beings sharing territory, mostly avoiding each other, occasionally fighting, rarely cooperating, no clear hierarchy or structure. Just creatures existing in same spaces and adapting as needed. The question of whether Draugr were top or bottom of supernatural hierarchy matters for understanding threat level. If they were apex predators, humans had major problems. If they were mid-tier threats that bigger creatures hunted, humans might have unexpected allies. The sources don't clarify this enough to know. What's clear is that belief in Draugr existed within broader supernatural worldview. They weren't only threat. They were one threat among many. This might actually make them more believable historically. Societies that believe in various supernatural beings are more likely to maintain those beliefs because the worldview is self-reinforcing. Everything strange gets attributed to one creature or another. Supernatural ecosystem with unclear relationships and vague documentation. Very helpful for humans trying to survive in that environment. Excellent information architecture. Now let's examine how skaldic poetry and oral tradition preserve Draugr stories across generations. Because the mechanics of cultural memory matter. Skalds were professional poets in Norse society. They memorized and performed poems about heroes, battles, and important events. Their craft required extraordinary memory. Poems were composed in complex meters with strict rules. This structure helped preserve content accurately across retellings. Draugr stories appeared in both prose sagas and skaldic verse. The verse versions were compressed, more elusive, assumed audience knowledge, but they served as memory anchors. If you forgot details of a saga, the poem reminded you. The two formats reinforced each other. The oral transmission meant stories evolved. Each telling might add details, remove details, shift emphasis. But the core structure remained because the poetic meter and memorable incidents created stability. You might forget whether Grettir fought Glámr in spring or winter, but you remember that Grettir fought Glámr and got cursed. The crucial elements persist. This creates interesting historical question. Are the written sagas accurate records of events? Or are they accumulations of centuries of storytelling where fact and fiction merged? Probably both. Some core truth existed. Multiple retellings added layers. Eventually, someone wrote it down. That written version became authoritative, but it's several steps removed from whatever originally happened. The performative aspect mattered. Skalds didn't just recite, they performed, used voice, gesture, dramatic pauses. A good skald made the audience feel present at the events. This emotional engagement made stories memorable. You remember how you felt during the performance, even if you forget specific words. The social context of telling mattered too. These stories were performed at feasts. People were drinking, socializing, in good moods or bad, depending on circumstances. The emotional state of the audience when they heard the story affected how they remembered it. Draugr stories told during dark winter nights hit differently than same stories told during summer festivals. Children learned stories from multiple sources: parents, grandparents, professional, storytellers, peers. Each source might emphasize different aspects. A child heard same story multiple times from different perspectives. This created robust knowledge. No single source controlled the narrative. The stories served multiple functions. Entertainment, obviously, but also education, warning, social bonding, moral instruction, identity formation, cultural continuity. A good Draugr story accomplished several of these simultaneously. This multifunctionality incentivized preservation. Stories that only entertained might be forgotten. Stories that did multiple things remained vital. The transition from oral to written changed dynamics. Written sagas fixed the narrative. No more evolution through retelling. But writing also preserved stories that might have been lost. The oral tradition was vulnerable to disruption. Plague, war, migration could break transmission chains. Writing provided backup. Literacy was limited in medieval Scandinavia. Most people couldn't read the written sagas, but literate people could read them aloud to others. This created hybrid tradition. Written source performed orally. Some benefits of both systems. Stability from writing. Engagement from performance. The Christian scribes who recorded pagan stories added their own interpretations, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious. They couldn't help viewing material through Christian framework. This probably distorted some elements, but it also meant stories survived Christianization. Better distorted preservation than no preservation. The geographic spread of stories followed social networks. Traders carried talis. Travelers shared stories. Marriages connected families from different regions. Stories moved along these connections. This created regional variations. Core narrative remained similar. Details differed based on local tradition. Some stories survived better than others. Why? Probably because they were more memorable, more useful, more emotionally resonant. The stories we have now are winners of thousand-year selection process. The boring ones got forgotten. The confusing ones got simplified. The best ones kept getting retold. Modern scholars study these stories, but can't experience them as medieval audiences did. We read silently, analyze critically. We don't hear them performed by skilled skalds at winter feasts while drinking mead and wondering if we performed our grandfather's burial correctly. The context is completely different. This affects understanding. The preservation of Draugr stories specifically suggests they served important cultural function, not just entertainment. These stories taught practical knowledge about death, burial, social behavior, and consequences. The supernatural framing made lessons memorable. The poetic structure made them transmissible. The cultural importance made them worth maintaining. We have these stories because hundreds of people across centuries decided they were worth remembering and sharing. Each link in that chain made active choice to preserve and transmit. That collective effort is why modern people can still learn about Draugr. Cultural memory requires cultural maintenance. Oral tradition that somehow preserved complex stories across generations without writing. Very reliable information technology. Absolutely no problems with accuracy or drift. Perfect system. These aren't just scary stories, though. They're windows into how medieval communities understood death, managed resources, maintained social order, and adapted to challenges. The Draugr served multiple functions simultaneously. Supernatural threat, social control mechanism, cultural memory. That multifunctionality is why it persisted. Let's talk about what modern archaeology reveals about Norse burial practices, because sometimes digging up old graves provides evidence that the stories weren't entirely invented. Archaeologists excavating Viking-age burial sites occasionally find unusual features. Bodies buried in positions that suggest restraint. Heavy stones placed on top of graves. Iron implements positioned in specific ways. Decapitated corpses with heads placed away from bodies. These aren't random variations. They're systematic patterns. One excavation in Iceland found a body pinned to the ground with large stones. The positioning suggested the stones were placed deliberately to prevent something from rising. Could be symbolic, could be practical. But it matches exactly what the sagas describe as Draugr prevention. Another site revealed a body with both big toes tied together. The binding had decayed, but bone positioning and preserved nut fragments confirmed this was intentional burial practice. Someone actually tied that corpse's toes together before burial. The sagas said this prevented walking. Someone believed it enough to do it. Corpse doors appear in archaeological record too. Buildings with sealed openings that serve no structural purpose. Too small for regular use, positioned oddly, but perfect size for carrying out a body, then permanently closed. This wasn't decorative architecture. This was functional supernatural security. Bodies found with iron scissors on the chest cavity, not placed casually, positioned deliberately, opened, forming a cross shape. Exact description from prevention rituals. Someone performed these rites, and someone else wrote them down, and archaeological evidence confirms both accounts. The interesting question is causation. Did these practices exist because Draugr were real threats? Or did Draugr beliefs persist because people performed these practices? Maybe the practices created the belief as much as belief created the practices. Either way, medieval Scandinavians invested significant resources in corpse control. The effort and expense suggest genuine concern. You don't systematically pin bodies down with stones for fun. You do it because you think it's necessary. And necessity implies threat. Some burial sites show evidence of disturbance and reburial. Bodies dug up, moved, reburied elsewhere, sometimes with additional restraints. The sagas describe exactly this happening when communities needed to relocate troublesome Draugr. The archaeology matches the stories. Burnt bone deposits in unexpected locations support the burning and scattering disposal method. You'd expect burial sites to have complete skeletons. Sometimes you find partial remains scattered across wide areas. Deliberate dispersal of cremated remains, just like the sagas prescribe for defeating Draugr. The wealth buried with some individuals is substantial. Weapons, jewelry, coins, sometimes ships. This confirms that treasure-guarding motivation wasn't invented. There actually was significant wealth in burial mounds, tempting targets. The Draugr stories make sense as deterrent system protecting valuable grave goods. Archaeological evidence doesn't prove supernatural creatures existed, but it proves people acted as if they existed. They performed elaborate preventive rituals. They invested in restraint systems. They treated some corpses as potential threats requiring special handling. The behavior is documented even if the underlying cause remains debated. Modern archaeologists are careful about interpretation. They document practices without claiming to explain supernatural mechanics. But the pattern is clear. These weren't isolated incidents. This was widespread, systematic approach to dealing with the dead. Culture-wide response to perceived threat. The sagas suddenly look less like pure fiction and more like historical documents recording actual practices. The supernatural elements might be interpretive framework for natural events, or they might be accurate descriptions of things people genuinely encountered. Archaeological evidence doesn't resolve which, just confirms that something was happening and communities responded systematically. Burial customs that looked like paranoid superstition now look like documented historical practice. Whether the threat was real or imagined, the response was definitely real. And the response shaped medieval Scandinavian society in measurable ways. Science confirming that people believed weird things. Groundbreaking research. Very surprising conclusions about historical populations. Now let's discuss what happens when Draugr beliefs meet Christianity, because this collision created interesting hybrid theology. Pre-Christian Norse saw Draugr as natural, if unpleasant, part of reality. Dead sometimes rise, some dead are hostile. You deal with it through physical means. Practical approach to practical problem. No moral dimension beyond. This is dangerous. Christianity introduced new framework. Dead rising is wrong. It's corruption, possibly demonic. The proper afterlife is heaven or hell, not hanging around your burial mound guarding gold. Draugr became not just dangerous, but spiritually problematic. This created theological questions. Are Draugr demons possessing corpses? Are they souls refusing to move on? Are they damned spirits trapped between worlds? Different Christian authorities gave different answers. No consensus emerged. The Door Doom ceremony shows creative synthesis. It uses Christian holy water and prayers, but applies them through Norse legal procedure. Each Draugr is formally summoned, given judgment, and commanded to depart. This treats them as beings with rights and responsibilities, rather than pure evil to be destroyed. Some Christian interpretations suggested Draugr were punishment for sin. Die while in state of sin, your body might rise as monster. This encouraged confession, proper religious practice, and living morally. Convenient motivation for Christian behavior, using existing folk belief as enforcement mechanism. Other interpretations focused on improper burial, preventing the soul from reaching afterlife. The body rises because the soul is stuck. Proper Christian burial with correct rites would prevent Draugr formation. This gave church monopoly on effective prevention. Want to avoid becoming undead? Better pay for proper Christian funeral. Priests became new experts in Draugr management. They had holy water, prayers, exorcism rituals. Some proved effective, or at least gave communities confidence that something was being done. Whether this was supernatural power or psychological comfort doesn't matter if it helped people cope. The burning and scattering method became problematic under Christianity. Christian doctrine emphasized bodily resurrection. Burning bodies interfered with resurrection. But burning was also the only reliable way to stop Draugr. This created practical versus theological conflict. Some communities compromised. Use Christian methods first. If those fail, fall back to burning. This preserved both theological correctness and practical effectiveness. Pragmatic approach that acknowledged both systems had value. The shape-shifting ability got reinterpreted. Pre-Christian, it was just power Draugr had. Under Christianity, it became evidence of demonic nature. Demons can transform. Draugr transform? Therefore Draugr are demonic. Logical leap that worked for people already inclined to believe. The curse ability fit Christian framework easily. Demons curse people. Draugr curse people. Again, evidence of demonic association. This made them theologically legible within Christian worldview while maintaining their danger. Interestingly, Christianization didn't eliminate Draugr belief. It reframed it. The creatures persisted, but with new interpretation. Old practices continued with Christian justification. The folk belief proved remarkably resilient, even as official theology changed. Some Christians tried to dismiss Draugr entirely as pagan superstition. These attempts mostly failed. The beliefs were too deeply rooted. Too many people had experiences they interpreted as Draugr encounters. You can't argument people out of their lived experience, even if that experience is questionable. The synthesis that emerged was practical Christianity. Use prayers and holy water. Also use salt and iron. Perform Christian burial. Also tie the toes together. Cover all bases. If one system doesn't work, maybe the other will. Risk management through theological redundancy. This pragmatic approach frustrated religious authorities who wanted pure Christian practice. But it worked for communities who needed actual solutions rather than theological purity. Folk religion often looks like this. Take what works from all available sources. Modern folklorists see this period as fascinating case study in cultural adaptation. Neither Christianity nor Norse paganism completely won. They merged into something that was both and neither. The Draugr survived transition by becoming theologically flexible. The creature that couldn't be killed by conventional means also couldn't be killed by religious conversion. Adapted to new context, survived through transformation. Very appropriate behavior for something that specializes in not staying dead. Let's discuss modern scientific attempts to explain Draugr encounters, because rational explanations exist for most supernatural phenomena. Sleep paralysis explains some sightings. You wake partially, but can't move. Your brain generates threatening presence. Feels like something sitting on your chest. Matches exactly the description of Draugr in cat form suffocating sleepers. Medieval people experiencing sleep paralysis would interpret through cultural framework. The feeling is real. The supernatural explanation is interpretation. Carbon monoxide poisoning from poorly ventilated buildings causes hallucinations, paranoia, and sense of presence. Multiple people in same house experiencing similar symptoms would reinforce belief that something external was causing problems. The Draugr haunting their old farmstead could be the farmstead having dangerous indoor air quality. Methane and other gases from decomposing bodies create strange effects in burial, mounds, lightheadedness, hallucinations, feelings of dread. Enter a sealed mound, breathe bad air, have frightening experience. Your brain tries to make sense of experience using available cultural concepts. Draugr seems like reasonable explanation. Mass hysteria explains outbreaks. One person claims to see something. Others become primed to see it too. Suggestion creates expectation. Expectation shapes perception. Soon everyone's seeing the Draugr, not lying. Genuinely perceiving something their brain constructed from suggestion and fear. Ergot poisoning from contaminated grain causes hallucinations and strange behavior. An outbreak could make entire communities see things. The shared delusion would feel real and would be validated by others experiencing the same effects. Collective poisoning interpreted as collective haunting. Animal misidentification in poor light. A large dog at night becomes a supernatural creature. A seal with unusual features becomes a shape-shifted Draugr. Your brain fills in details based on expectation. You see what you're culturally prepared to see. Actual grave robbers using Draugr reputation as cover. Break into mound. Steal treasure. Leave evidence suggesting supernatural activity. Community assumes Draugr doesn't investigate human criminal activity. Perfect cover story that's self-reinforcing. The more people believe in Draugr, the more useful the cover becomes. Diseases with unknown causes. People get sick near certain areas. They don't know about bacteria or environmental toxins. They do know Draugr drain life force. The supernatural explanation fits the observed pattern even if mechanism is wrong. Bad water near a burial mound makes people sick. The mound is identified as source. The Draugr living there becomes explanation. Psychological trauma manifesting as haunting. Survivors of violence see their attackers everywhere. Can't process the trauma. The dead person haunting them is actually their own unprocessed grief and fear. External threat feels more manageable than internal trauma. The Draugr becomes externalization of internal psychological damage. Social control through manufactured threat. People in power benefit from population being afraid of certain things. Stories get emphasized. Unusual events get interpreted through supernatural lens. Not conspiracy exactly. Just social dynamics that reinforce useful beliefs. The Draugr serves community purpose, so the community maintains belief. All these explanations are plausible. Many probably contributed to historical accounts. But they don't explain everything. Some reported Draugr encounters have details that don't fit neat explanations. Multiple witnesses with similar observations under different conditions. Physical evidence that doesn't match psychological explanation. Patterns that suggest something systematic was happening. The rationalist position is that all supernatural belief can be explained through combination of misperception, mental illness, poisoning, and social dynamics. This is probably mostly correct. But mostly isn't entirely. The edges of cases where none of these fit raise questions. More importantly, whether Draugr existed objectively or not, they existed socially and psychologically. They shaped behavior, influenced architecture, determined burial practices, created social structures. The effect was real regardless of cause. And effects are what matter for understanding history. Science explains mechanisms, but doesn't always capture experience. You can explain sleep paralysis neurologically, while acknowledging the person experiencing it is genuinely terrified, and their fear is valid response to their perception. Both things are true. The Draugr might be a combination of real threats, misunderstood natural phenomena, and cultural interpretation. That doesn't make the belief false in meaningful sense. It just makes it complicated. Most important historical beliefs are complicated. Rational explanations for ancient superstitions. How reassuring. Definitely means we modern people don't have any culturally specific beliefs that future generations will explain away scientifically. We're clearly past all that. Now let's talk about what the Draugr teaches about dealing with problems that get worse when you confront them directly, because this is broadly applicable wisdom. Some problems actually do strengthen through opposition. Addiction gets worse if you attack it with shame. Anger grows when you fight it with more anger. Trauma deepens when you force confrontation before you're ready. The Draugr metaphor applies to real psychological and social phenomena. The lesson isn't never confront problems. It's understand what kind of problem you're dealing with before choosing approach. Direct assault works for some challenges, makes others worse. Knowing difference is crucial skill. The Draugr requires specific approach. Wrestling, not weapons. Complete destruction, not partial damage. Preparation, not spontaneous action. This maps to real problem solving. Some issues need particular strategies. Using wrong strategy makes things worse, even if that strategy usually works. The getting stronger mechanic teaches that failed solutions teach the problem how to resist you. Try same approach repeatedly, and you're essentially training the problem to become immune to that approach. Addiction works like this. Your failed quit attempts teach your addiction patterns what to expect and how to survive them. The curse element shows that even successful confrontation can have lasting cost. You might win, but carry damage. This is true for many difficult life situations. Sometimes you must engage despite knowing it will hurt you. The alternative is worse. But acknowledge the cost, rather than pretending victory, is clean. The community-based solution teaches that some problems require help. Individual heroism isn't always sufficient. Knowing when to ask for help, how to coordinate with others, when to admit you can't handle something alone. These are practical skills the Draugr stories encode. The prevention is better than cure principle applies broadly. Don't create the problem in first place. Proper burial prevents Draugr. Proper life choices prevent many other problems. This sounds obvious, but people constantly skip prevention to deal with consequences. The stories remind you that prevention is worth significant effort and expense. The smell as warning teaches that problems often announce themselves before becoming critical. Pay attention to warning signs. Don't ignore them hoping they'll go away. The Draugr stench precedes the attack. Your life problems probably give signals too. Notice them. Respond appropriately. The shape-shifting ability teaches that problems adapt to your defenses. Build one defense, the problem finds another vector. This is true for physical health, mental health, relationships, career challenges. Static solutions fail against adaptive problems. Must remain flexible yourself. The treasure-guarding motivation teaches that attachment creates vulnerability. The Draugr can't let go of gold. This keeps it bound to burial mound, makes it predictable, gives it weakness. Your attachments similarly constrain you. Understanding what you can't release reveals what controls you. The intelligence retention teaches that complex problems require respect. You can't just overpower them. They adapt. They remember. They plan. Treating sophisticated challenge as simple one leads to failure. Match strategy to problem complexity. The requirement for complete destruction teaches that partial solutions to serious problems often fail. If you're going to deal with something major, commit fully. Half measures frequently make things worse. The Draugr burned incompletely regenerates. Your half-solved problems similarly come back. The unfalsifiability teaches that you can't always prove something doesn't exist or won't happen. Must act on balance of evidence and risk assessment. Can't wait for perfect information. The Draugr might be real. Better safe than sorry is sometimes rational strategy, not just paranoia. None of this means literal Draugr exist, and you should prepare for undead combat. It means the Draugr, as narrative device and cultural symbol, encodes useful information about problem-solving, risk management, and human psychology. Stories persist because they're useful, not just because they're scary. Thousand-year-old Icelandic sagas accidentally containing applicable life advice. Who knew ancient horror stories or practical self-help guides? Very efficient use of literature. Let's discuss why the Draugr remains relevant today beyond just video games and fantasy literature, because the core concept speaks to modern anxieties. We fight problems that get stronger. Political polarization, where each side's opposition strengthens the other. Social media algorithms that amplify engagement through outrage. Surveillance systems that expand to counter evasion techniques. Modern life is full of adversarial dynamics, where resistance feeds growth. The Draugr is perfect metaphor for these adaptive threats. You can't just attack them directly. Every failed attempt makes them stronger. Must understand the system. Must approach strategically. Must be willing to do the difficult work of proper solution rather than quick fix. Climate change exhibits Draugr-like properties. Delayed responses make it stronger. Half measures prove insufficient. The problem adapts to our solutions by becoming more entrenched, and it will curse future generations even if we defeat it now. The parallels are uncomfortable. Technology platforms that grow more powerful as you try to regulate them. They learn from each regulatory attempt, adapt their strategies, become harder to control. The Draugr that strengthens through combat appears in modern economic and technological forms. Addiction treatment often fails because the addiction learns from your attempts. Your brain builds resistance to whatever strategy you try. Must complete the treatment fully, or it comes back stronger. The parallel to Draugr combat requirements is direct. Authoritarian governments that use opposition to justify expansion of power. Every protest proves they need more control. Every resistance is evidence they were right to crack down. They literally get stronger when you fight them. The Draugr as political metaphor is uncomfortably apt. Misinformation that spreads faster when you try to correct it. Each debunking becomes new content that the algorithm amplifies. The lie grows through attempts to kill it. Must approach carefully with complete strategy or make things worse. Mental health challenges that intensify when confronted wrong way. Depression that deepens through self-criticism. Anxiety that grows through avoidance. OCD that strengthens through ritual. These require specific approaches. General solutions fail and cause harm. The requirement for wrestling specifically, physical engagement, maps to need for genuine confrontation with difficult realities. Can't solve these problems at distance. Can't use weapons, can't hide behind technology or process. Must engage directly and personally. This is uncomfortable truth many people avoid. The community response element reminds us that individualism has limits. Some modern problems cannot be solved by isolated individuals. Climate, pandemics, economic collapse, democratic breakdown. These require collective action. The hero narrative is insufficient. Need coordinated community response. The prevention through ritual emphasis speaks to importance of maintenance and systems. Modern infrastructure, democratic institutions, social programs. These require ongoing investment and attention. Neglect creates problems that are expensive to fix later. The burial ritual approach of investing heavily in prevention is wise, but often ignored. The Draugr isn't just Viking history or gaming enemy. It's archetypal representation of adaptive adversarial challenge that resists direct confrontation and strengthens through failed attempts to destroy it. This archetype appears constantly in modern life. Recognizing it helps you respond appropriately. Medieval Icelanders encoded practical wisdom in monster stories. We're still learning from those stories because the problems they address are timeless. The specific threat changes. The dynamics remain constant. The Draugr persists because it describes something real about how certain challenges work. Ancient horror story accidentally providing relevant framework for understanding modern complex systems. Literature doing double duty as both entertainment and instruction. Very economical. Before we finish, let's talk about how Skyrim specifically changed everything for the Draugr, because one video game did more for this folklore than centuries of academic study. Before 2011, most people had never heard of Draugr. Norse mythology enthusiasts knew them. Saga readers knew them. Total population of maybe a few thousand people worldwide. Then Skyrim released, and suddenly millions encountered Draugr as their first dungeon enemies. The game made choices that honored source material while adapting for gameplay. Draugr inhabit Nordic ruins. They guard treasure. They're stronger than basic zombies. They use weapons. All of this maps to saga descriptions. The adaptation required compromises. Game Draugr don't grow larger during combat. Too complicated, they don't smell. Scratch and sniff gaming hasn't caught on. But the core concept survived. The scaling difficulty happened differently. You encounter stronger Draugr as you level up. Challenge scales to player progression. This maintains the folklore principle. You can't just overpower them through level advantage. Different implementation, same result. The game introduced millions to the word Draugr, taught correct pronunciation through voice acting, associated the creature with Nordic culture, created shared cultural experience around previously obscure folklore, massive public education disguised as entertainment. Academic conferences about Norse mythology suddenly had more attendees. People wanted to learn about real Draugr after encountering game versions. The game became gateway to serious scholarship. Educational institutions should probably send Bethesda thank you notes. The meme culture around Skyrim Draugr is its own phenomenon. The dungeon diving, where you encounter them constantly, became iconic. Draugr evolved from obscure folklore to recognizable pop culture reference. Market penetration that academics dream about. The criticism is that Skyrim sanitized them. Game Draugr don't have the full horror of saga descriptions. They don't reek, don't curse you permanently. A creature is domesticated from mainstream gaming. Fair criticism. But also, how many people would have learned about Draugr at all without Skyrim? Sanitized introduction beats no introduction. Skyrim also created expectation problem. People encounter real Draugr folklore and think that's just the video game monster. Wrong direction. The game drew from folklore. But for most people, game came first. Cultural chronology inverted through media saturation. The lasting impact is that Draugr entered mainstream cultural consciousness. They're now on same recognition level as vampires or zombies for people who play games. This persistence beyond original cultural context is how folklore survives long term. The Norse would be confused by the mechanism, but probably pleased by the result. Other games followed. God of War included Draugr. Valheim made them central enemies. Once Skyrim proved the concept worked, others adopted it. The Draugr became standard Norse-themed enemy type across gaming industry. Standardization, it reinforces awareness. The commercial success validated the appeal. Draugr sell copies. They're compelling enemies that players remember. This proved to entertainment industry that Norse mythology has untapped potential, sparked broader interest in adapting other Norse elements. Video game about dragons accidentally became most effective Draugr educational tool ever created. Probably wasn't intentional. Worked anyway. Now let's address the practical question. Should we still tell scary stories about Draugr to children? This matters because cultural transmission requires active choice by each generation. Arguments for continuing the tradition. Cultural preservation has value. These stories are heritage. They connect modern people to medieval ancestors. Losing them means losing piece of cultural identity. Every tradition that dies makes humanity slightly more homogeneous. The stories also teach useful lessons. Respect for death, consequences for actions, importance of community. These lessons work whether Draugr are real or not. Supernatural framing makes them memorable. Children remember scary stories better than abstract lectures. Arguments against scaring children with supernatural threats might cause unnecessary anxiety. Modern kids face enough real problems without adding undead warriors. The social control aspect is manipulative. Using fear to enforce behavior is questionable, even if effective. The stories also encode outdated beliefs. Modern medicine explains pregnancy loss better than Draugr do. The specific social context that made Draugr useful doesn't exist anymore. Teaching obsolete frameworks might confuse rather than educate. Middle ground approach separates entertainment from belief. Tell the stories as stories. This is what people used to believe, rather than this is what you should believe. Preserve cultural knowledge while maintaining critical distance. This approach requires nuance. The stories work better when told seriously. People really believe this and organize their lives around it has different impact than, here's silly superstition. Respecting the tradition while acknowledging modern perspective is tricky balance. Educational context helps. Learn about Draugr as part of studying Norse culture. understand the historical framework. See how the beliefs functioned. This is cultural anthropology rather than folklore transmission. Knowledge about tradition rather than transmission of tradition. Different purposes. The practical impact is that Draugr are becoming primarily entertainment rather than belief. Most children who learn about them do so through games or movies, not through serious cultural transmission. The stories survive, but the faith behind them fades. Whether this matters depends on what you value. For children specifically, age-appropriate introduction matters. Small children don't need full horror of Saga Draugr. Teenagers might find it interesting. Adults can handle complete picture. Scaling complexity to developmental stage makes sense. The answer is probably that we should preserve the stories while being honest about their status. Neither pretend they're literally true, nor dismiss them as worthless. They're cultural artifacts that teach us about how humans created meaning. That's worth preserving, even if we don't believe in undead warriors anymore. Tell your children about Draugr if you want. Let them decide what to do with the information. Cultural transmission requires both teaching and choice. The Draugr survived 1,000 years of cultural change. Probably will survive 1,000 more in one form or another. Finally, let's return to the question we started with and provide the actual answer. Why does the Draugr get stronger every time you try to kill it? The supernatural explanation is that combat rage feeds their power. They're motivated by greed, vengeance, hatred. Fighting them intensifies these emotions. Emotion converts to supernatural strength through mechanisms Norse culture didn't specify but took as given. The angrier they get, the stronger they become. Fighting makes them angry. Loop completes itself. The physical explanation is size shifting combined with preservation. They don't decay or weaken. They can grow larger at will. Extended combat gives them time and reason to expand. By the end of fight, you're facing something twice the size you started fighting. The strength increase isn't mystical. It's geometric. More mass equals more power. The psychological explanation is that you're getting weaker while they stay constant. They don't tire, don't breathe, don't feel pain. You do all these things. As you fatigue, their relative advantage grows. It feels like they're getting stronger. Really, you're getting weaker, and they're maintaining baseline. But the effect is the same. The strategic explanation is that they learn from your attacks. Intelligence persists after death. They observe your technique, adapt their defense, counter your strategy. Each failed attack teaches them something. By attempt 3 or 4, they figured out your patterns and compensated. This appears as them getting stronger when actually you've become predictable. The metaphysical explanation is that incomplete destruction feeds them. Try to burn them, but don't finish. The fire strengthens what survives. Try to decapitate, but miss. They absorb the attempt's energy. Partial damage proves insufficient and somehow reinforces what remains. Must complete the destruction in single attempt or make them harder to defeat next time. A social explanation is survivorship bias. We remember fights where the Draugr seem to get stronger because those are the interesting ones. Fights where the hero won quickly don't make good stories. The strengthening pattern is selection effect. We're hearing about the difficult cases and assuming they're representative. The practical explanation is curse and psychological impact. Win the fight, but get cursed. You're now weaker for all future challenges. This makes subsequent Draugr encounters harder. It looks like Draugr are getting stronger. Actually, you've been debuffed by previous encounters. The progressive difficulty is accumulation of curse effects. The narrative explanation is that this is good storytelling. Static difficulty enemies are boring. Enemies that scale with protagonist create ongoing challenge. The Draugr strengthening through combat is dramatic tension device that makes better stories. The mechanic persists because it's effective narrative tool. The truth is probably all of these. The Norse didn't distinguish clearly between physical, psychological, supernatural, and narrative causation the way modern analysis does. A thing could be true in multiple ways simultaneously. The Draugr gets stronger through combat because that's how Draugr work. The mechanism is less important than the pattern. What matters practically is the lesson. Don't fight what you can't defeat. Don't attack what gets stronger through resistance. Don't keep trying the same thing when it's clearly not working. Know when to stop, regroup, and try a completely different approach. And if you must fight something that strengthens through combat, commit absolutely to total victory in single attempt. The Draugr teaches that half measures fail. Partial solutions create worse problems. When stakes are this high, you don't get second chances without heavy cost. The Draugr gets stronger every time you try to kill it, because that's what forces you to actually learn how to kill it properly. The mechanic is teaching tool disguised as monster ability. Fail enough times, and you either master the lesson or die trying. Either way, the problem resolves itself. Very efficient educational system. Mortality-based incentive structure. Pass or perish. Ultimate accountability. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Norse mythology's most persistently unkillable creature. We've explored what the Draugr is, why it functions as it does, how to defeat it, and what it teaches about confronting problems that resist simple solutions. The Draugr survives in modern consciousness because it represents something timeless. Challenges that strengthen through resistance. Problems that punish incomplete solutions. Threats that require specific approaches rather than general responses. These dynamics appear throughout history and across cultures. Whether you're fighting literal undead in video games or metaphorical ones in daily life, the lesson remains consistent. Understand what you're facing. Prepare properly. Commit fully. Accept that even victory has costs. And know when to seek help rather than fighting alone. The Norse encoded practical wisdom in terrifying stories. The stories survive because the wisdom remains relevant. Specific threats change, but fundamental patterns persist. The Draugr teaches us about these patterns through one very specific, very angry corpse that refuses to stay dead. Sleep well, everyone. May your burial practices be thorough, your supernatural threats minimal, and your wrestling skills unnecessary. And if you do encounter something that gets stronger when you fight it, remember, sometimes the right move is not fighting at all. Sometimes it's getting way better at fighting. And sometimes it's burning everything and scattering the ashes. The Draugr would want you to know the difference. Until next time, lock your doors, respect the dead, and don't rob any burial mounds no matter how much treasure they supposedly contain. The gold is never worth it. The curse lasts forever, and the Draugr has been practicing for centuries. Sweet dreams.